A hardcore Inuyasha fan in Canada finally watches Inuyasha The Final Act 15 years after the series' debut in Japan, 12 years after the first English air date in North America. He finally watches Inuyasha The Final Act in 2024. That hardcore Inuyasha fan is me. Come join me in this video as I share my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my reviews, my ratings, my feedback, and my overall experience finally seeing Inuyasha The Final Act over 14 years since I last watched the series on DVD. I was so excited to finally see the final act, and I'm here to share my experience finally seeing this series with all of you. Play my intro.
Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
This Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Thank you, Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Oh, Jayvardy. Oh my gosh.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about my history as an Inuyasha fan and how I came to watching the final act now of all times, finally after, so many years of it being released and it being available and so many years of me being a fan. Um, Firstly, let me point out that cosplayer in the middle underneath the symbol, that's me. And I must have been, that photo is Halloween 2009, so I would have been 18. I was born in 1990, but I'm born in December of 1990, so I would be 18 at that photo. Gonna be 19 soon, but not even legal drinking age in Canada when I took that photo. And that photo was taken like years after me being an Inuyasha fan. I must have started being an Inuyasha fan in like 2005, probably, maybe 2004. I didn't look up when Inuyasha was first released on YTV before filming this, but that's where it all started, and I'll get into that in a second. But that's me in 2009, dressed as Inuyasha in a homemade costume, and there's a bit of a funny story about that, and I'll get to that in a bit too. But I just wanted to point out that that's me. So many years ago. I wasn't even 20 years old at the time, and now I'm over 30. Above that, at the top, those DVDs, that's a close-up photograph of my DVD collection of Inuyasha. That's all 7 seasons of the original series on my DVD shelf. So I've had the Inuyasha series collected on DVD for many years. But this is still my first time finally watching the final act. It's kind of amazing that it took me so long, but I want to get into my history as a fan and how I came to watching it now. And if you really just want to see or hear my thoughts on the show and you don't want to spend all this time with me because this video will get long, there are timelines in a pinned comment as well as in the timeline of the video. You'll be able to skip through to, parts that you want to hear and parts that you don't want to hear, etc. Because I tend to go really long when I make these videos. But let's talk about my history as a fan of Inuyasha. It all started on YTV, which is it's called youth television. It's a TV channel in Canada. It was channel 25 in the region that I grew up in. But I would watch Inuyasha when it started debuting on YTV with my brother and sister. Now, we were already into anime and anime light long before this, my brother and I. My sister was still very young when we first started watching Inuyasha. She was probably too young to be watching Inuyasha, to be honest, because she was born in 2000. And we started watching it in my mom and dad's house before they separated. And my sister must have been 3, 4, maybe 5, but not any older than that when we first started watching. So yeah, it must have been 2004, 2005 when we first started watching it on YTV. But we were already like anime light fans, my brother and I. Like, of course, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, just the Dragon Ball franchise in general. I might take my glasses off for a bit. Um, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Digimon, Gundam, like all the animes that YTV would play. My brother really got into Naruto. I never got into Naruto. But all the animes that YTV would play, we were into. Um, and everybody was like that's what we watched as kids because YTV got into anime and we all watched YTV and that's we just all watched anime. But Inuyasha came at a time when I was probably just finishing grade school and just entering high school is when it really started becoming a thing. I probably started watching it in grade 8 going into grade 9. Um, and at this point, a lot of kids were already out of the phase, but it wasn't a phase for us. And Inuyasha was like one of the shows that like we watched on our own accord. We weren't watching it to fit in with everybody else. We watched it because we liked it. We got into it because it was something that we were into naturally. And that's something that I really appreciated about the show because like the people I talked to most about Inuyasha, like when I was, in the midst of my fandom were my brother and sister. We would watch it together on YTV every night at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock or 8 p.m. whenever it came on originally. And one of the first things I bought, um, like with the, working odd jobs, like either from my parents, like going to work with my dad and maybe he would give me a little bit of money or doing like babysitting jobs for my god brother or for my godmother of my god brother. Um, you know, Before I even had my first ever paying job, one of the things I bought with my own money was season 2 of Inuyasha on DVD. This is still when DVDs was like a thing, like a really big thing. Like Blu-rays weren't even released yet at the time. That wasn't even like an invention yet. But I bought season 2 of Inuyasha on DVD, and we would watch that over and over and over again at my house. Like me and my brother and sister, we would watch Inuyasha season 2 over and over and over again. And it's a good one to watch over and over again because, in my opinion, it's the best season of Inuyasha. That's the season where they get really into the lore of Tetsaiga and Tenseiga and Inuyasha and Sesshomaru's father. Inuyasha's blood taking over his body and him going full demon, him finally learning the backlash wave. It's when Naraku starts, pumping out all his incarnations, or all his offspring, whatever you want to call them, like Kagra, Kana, and a whole bunch of them. Like, I don't even remember them all because it's been so long since I watched season 2. I should probably state that I didn't, of those DVDs, that collection, I didn't watch any of them before sitting down to watch the final act. I'll get into that a little bit more later as we go here, but um, yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, we would watch season 2 over and over and over again, and it's a great season. It has so much great stuff in it. It ends with Inuyasha learning the backlash wave, but yeah, it's a great season to watch over and over again, and that's what we did. Like we would watch like we would call it watching a disc. Like that's what my brother and me and my sister would call it. Like, do you want to watch a disc? And like it meant like, do you want to go watch one of the Inuyasha discs? And it was all of season 2 because I didn't have the rest of those collection yet. But that's how it all started for me as an Inuyasha fan. Started on YTV, and we'd watch it every time a new episode was played on YTV, or we'd watch it weekly. I can't remember what day they played it on. Maybe it was Fridays. I can't remember. But we would watch Inuyasha on YTV. Then I bought season 2, and we would just watch those over and over and over again. And then, as time went on, um, going through like the family divorce of my parents and such, and me, my brother and sister getting separated, or me and my brother lived with my dad, but my sister no longer lived with us. That family tradition ended up breaking during that time, but it wasn't the end of the Inuyasha fandom for me. I remember watching it on the computer. This is back when anime was super, super accessible online. Like you would literally just type in like watch Inuyasha or watch Naruto or watch Dragon Ball. And there were like literal websites just called Watch Dragon Ball or Watch Inuyasha or Watch Naruto or whatever show it is you wanted to watch of anime especially. And you would just go on this website and like literally every single episode was there. You would just click play and watch it. Like you can't do that online nowadays. Those types of websites don't exist anymore. They're super hard to come by, super hard to find. All the different media agencies really crack down on that stuff. But back before like 2010, like it was super easy to find anime on the internet and just watch it. Just type it in and just watch it online. Highly illegal, but like I said, I did collect the entire series on DVD, so it's not like I didn't pay for it eventually. But like I do remember, watching it on the computer, like just so easily, and it's such a different world now, and that's just another point of like how long time has passed since I last watched Inuyasha. Feudal Combat, which is a PS2 game, not even a PS3. Like we're talking PS2. Um, like me and my brother, we would rent that over and over again. This is back when like Blockbuster existed, and in Canada we have a place called Rogers that also did like DVD and video game renting. That's like they're like a phone and cable company primarily, but like they'd also have like mini video and video game rental stores like similar to Blockbuster. And we would just go to Rogers or Blockbuster and rent Feudal Combat over and over and over again. You know how like you would back in the day, like every kid from the 90s and 80s understand this. Gen Z doesn't understand this as much, but um, you would like rent video games over and over and over again instead of actually buying the game. That's one of the games we did that with was with Feudal Combat, and like we would just rent Feudal Combat over and over and over again and just play that game over and over and over again, me and my brother. But then, later in life, you know, post high school, um, I had a good friend that I met in high school that, you know, we kind of reconnected after high school. Like both of us had like a in between high school and college life because I didn't go to college immediately after graduating high school. We had like an in between high school and college life where we became good friends again after high school. And he was an Inuyasha fan too, but um, long story short, him and I didn't ever talk about Inuyasha in high school because we weren't ever together enough during high school to really talk about it all that much. That's a whole other long, long story we're not going to get into. But during this, like in between high school and college time, like I would just literally go over to his house to play Feudal Combat. And like we would have entire Friday nights of just us playing Feudal Combat over and over and over again, like just fighting each other. I would try to pick Inuyasha or Demon Inuyasha as much as possible. Um, it's one of the games that he was a little bit better than me at, which was really annoying, by the way. But yeah, but then eventually just collecting it on DVD as well. So like I have tons of memories over so many years of being an Inuyasha fan, like starting on YTV in like 2003, 2004 to playing, Feudal Combat in between my college or in between my college and high school years and like 2011, 2012, like 2013, you know, um, like 10 years after the show, like we debuted on YTV, here I am playing Feudal Combat. I don't even know what year that game came out, but here I am playing Feudal Combat with like, another 21, 22-year old, however old we were at the time. But yeah, like just so many years of being an Inuyasha fan and obviously collecting it on DVD. There you see me cosplaying. That's one of my first ever like homemade cosplay outfits I ever did. It's kind of cheesy. You can see the ears and the wig aren't like fantastic, but like I did my best and I had to help making it. Funny story about that outfit was my high school girlfriend at the time. We no longer are together, obviously. This is way, 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 way long ago. But my high school girlfriend at the time, I kind of got her into Inuyasha as a late bloomer. Like, we started watching it together probably that year in 2009. And I wanted to dress up as Inuyasha for Halloween. And she helped make that costume, and she wanted to dress up as a character as well. But this is how lame it ended up being. She didn't want to dress up as Kagome or Kikyo. Her favorite character was Sango, and she wanted to dress up as Sango. Well, I didn't want to dress up as Moroku. So we as a couple went as Inuyasha and Sango, which is just like, what kind of fan like fiction nonsense is that, right? Like, she should have been Kikyo or Kagome, or I should have been Moroku, but neither of us wanted to do that. She wanted to be Sango, I wanted to be Inuyasha. And there's literally photos of us somewhere like holding each other like, boyfriend, girlfriend, like arm in arm, like around each other's shoulders, around each other's waist as Inuyasha and Sango. Obviously, I'm not going to put that in this video because her and I are long, long, long broken up at this point, but B, it's just lame. It's just lame Inuyasha and Sango, like, to be arm in arm like that. It's funny looking back on, but kind of sad and pathetic at the same time. It's funny in a sad, pathetic, and ironic way. Um, but another thing about Inuyasha is like it got me into J-pop. Like K-pop is the big thing nowadays, right? Like Korean pop, like that's what Gen Z is into, like K-pop. Well, before K-pop, well, not before K-pop because Japan and Korea like have always existed, but before K-pop was big in North America, there was a mini, and I mean really mini. Like K-pop is pretty big in North America, but like J-pop had like a very mini run. But for me, I got into J-pop because of Inuyasha. Like all like the great J-pop music it has as intros and outros for the show. Bands like Do As Infinity, Every Little Thing, Dream, like great J-pop bands. Do As Infinity being the best one, of course. Um, Having their songs being used as intros and outros, and there's just so many great songs. Change the World is the very first intro song to Inuyasha by a band called V6. It's like a J-pop boy band, and it's a fantastic song. Um, but like to this day, 5 to 10% of my music on my iPod is J-pop, and that's because of Inuyasha. And I have every single Do As Infinity song ever recorded on my iPod, and I got into them. They're one of my favorite bands because of Inuyasha, and they've been a staple on my iPod for decades because of Inuyasha. This show it's had such a long-standing position in my life, and it's had such an influence on my life. And I'm just so thankful for this show. Like, I genuinely love this show. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect show by any means, but just the memories and experiences I had as a fan, what it added to, my family life, what it added to my personality and my like music taste, and the connections it helped me form with friends, and just everything about this show. I love this show so much. It took me a long ass time to get here. There are a lot of long stories. Firstly, the English versions of the final act didn't come out until 2012. And at that point, I was working full time, I was prepping for college, and I was um, in the midst of a lot in my personal life that I'm not going to completely dive into here, but there were some romantic flings going on that were big in my life in 2012. There was a friendship with someone that would eventually become a romantic partner who I'd actually end up living with. I'll talk more about her in a little bit. Um, there was just a lot going on in 2012, and I didn't have cable TV at the time, I don't think. Um, I didn't have streaming options available at the time, I don't think. And there was just reasons why I didn't watch it when it came out. And just, eventually in 2014, I moved out of my dad's house. I went to college. I was working, trying to support myself as I went through college. And I just never got around to watching Inuyasha The Final Act. It was in the back of my mind. It came out in Japan in 2009, 2010. It started its run in 2009. It ended in 2010 in Japan. So I've been aware of the final act for 14, 15 years. And the last time I probably watched an episode of season 7 on DVD was probably around that time. Like, I'm thinking the last time I probably watched it was in 2010. I would have watched it after that photo in 2009, but I don't think I would have been watching it in 2011. Maybe 2011, but definitely not 2012. So we'll say 2011 for safety was probably the last time I saw an episode of Inuyasha. That's 13 years ago. 13 years ago. But it's been in the back of my mind. You need to watch Inuyasha The Final Act. You need to order it on DVD. You need to finally see it. You need to finally see how Inuyasha ends. Season 7 ends so abruptly and doesn't give a conclusion at all. You need to finally watch the final act. And here's how I came to watch it now. Long story short, there was just a lot going on in my life, and it's always been in the back of my mind, and I've enjoyed having it in the back of my mind that you need to watch the final act, you need to watch the final act. And I never got around to it, but here's why I got to it now. In this year, in 2024, I've had some major things happen in my life, and I've used content consuming to deal with those things in life. So firstly, before I talk about 2024 specifically, I want to talk about some of the things that have happened in my life since the last time I watched Inuyasha, compared, like, in between watching it on DVD to, finally watching the final act now. Like, a lot has happened in my life. I graduated high school. I graduated high school since the last time I watched Inuyasha. I went to and graduated college, 4 years of college. My parents got divorced. My parents got divorced before I graduated high school. This list is out of order, but this is all the things that have happened in my life. It's life accomplishments and sorrows since the last time I watched Inuyasha. And I'll just read them in the order that I wrote them, but they're written out of chronological order. So I graduated college and high school. The 4 years of college, I did 1 year of media studies and 3 years of film and television production, which is a hands-on program, like actually learning production aspects of film and television, very little actual classroom work in it. I did 4 years of college, and I have diplomas in media studies and film and television production. I made a movie. I made a 40-minute short film on my own budget with my own money that I wrote and directed myself. I made a movie. I used the skills I learned in college, and I made a movie on my own budget that I wrote and directed. I lived with a girlfriend who was my best friend. We were together in a relationship for 5 years. We lived together for 3 years, and we've known each other since we were kids. I first met her at like age 10. Her name was Melissa. I first met her at like age 10 or 11. She went to my brother's school. She's the same age as my brother, who's 2 years younger than I am. But she went to my brother's elementary school, and my brother and I went to different elementary schools, but then eventually we were all in the same high school together. But I first met her when she was in the same school as my brother, when I was about probably 10 or 11 years old. I put both dogs like both dogs, but it's actually all three of my dogs have passed away in this time. Um, my first dog, Bailey, would have been alive when we first started watching Inuyasha on YTV. And Ripley and Jesse, who came after he passed away, um, Jesse actually just passed away this year in 2024. Um, she would have been born in 2008. So yeah, like she was around before, like she was born just before that photo was taken. Um, like a year before that photo was taken. So yeah, all three of my dogs who have been around when I was into Inuyasha have since passed away. I started going back to church, which I started doing in 2023, and I haven't missed a single week since I started going back in 2023. I moved out of my dad's house, and I haven't moved back in with him since. I moved out of my dad's house in 2014. That's 10 years ago. Me, my brother, and sis, we're all adults. My sister's born in 2000. She's 24 years old now. My parents got divorced, like I said. I'm over 30. I have gotten my driver's license. I've owned four cars. Four cars I've owned since the last time I watched Inuyasha. And the biggest thing, I mentioned Melissa, who was my best friend, and I was in a romantic relationship for 5 years. We lived together for 3 years. She passed away this year in January of 2024. She passed away on January 5th. Um, January 5th, 2024, she passed away. And ever since she passed away in January, I have been consuming a lot of content as, coping mechanisms and, you know, keeping myself occupied type thing. And this year, I have gone to Spider Mania in the movie theaters. Columbia Pictures actually released every single Spider-Man movie ever made back into theaters. They did like a 8-week run of all 8 live-action Spider-Man movies, and I went to each and every single one of those on Spider Mondays, starting with Tobey Maguire's first Spider-Man movie to the Spider-Man No Way Home. I went to all 8 of them this year in theaters for Spider-Mania. And that helped, but like I didn't realize that there was something kind of missing, content-wise. I watched every single James Bond movie ever made, starting with Dr. No all the way to No Time to Die, in chronological order of its release, including, by the way, Never Say Never Again, which is a non-canon version of James Bond starring Sean Connery. It should be canon because that movie is awesome, by the way. But I watched every single James Bond movie from Dr. No all the way to No Time to Die. That was, you know, seeing all of them, like every single one of them, that was helpful, but I still hadn't realized there was something kind of missing in here. I started a library list of rentals, feeling nostalgic for the Blockbuster and Roger days. I've been going to the library, and thankfully I live in Toronto, so Toronto has like 30 branches, maybe more, of TPL, and each one of those branches have like 100 or more DVDs in its DVD section. So I'm able to rent DVDs kind of like I would be in Blockbuster back in the day through the Toronto Public Library. And I've been making a list, and I'm almost at 100. And this list started with me thinking of a movie that I've been meaning to see for many years and never got around to seeing. And I thought, how am I going to finally see this movie? And I thought, hey, maybe the library has it. I was just thinking randomly, like, I have a library card, maybe the library has it. And that movie was The Girl Who Played with Fire, which is the sequel to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I saw the original Girl with the Dragon Tattoo when it first came out, and I'm a huge, huge fan of the David Fincher remake starring Daniel Craig and Rooney Mara, which I have on DVD and Blu-ray. but I never saw the girl who played with fire. First of all, David Fincher never got around to making his version of that movie, which is a crime. He should have gotten to make it because his Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was awesome. I digress. But I never saw the original Swedish version either. And I looked up to see if the library had it, and they did. And not only did they have it, but the actual closest branch to me had it. So I was in walking distance of it. And ever since then, I've been starting a list of just TV series and movies that I've been meaning to see. And I've been I've been renting at least 1 or 2 DVDs a week, and I'm almost at a list of 100, and I've been ranking them. My only qualifications being a movie or a TV series that I've seen less than once. Less than once. If I've seen it once, it's okay to rent it, but it has to be once or none. And finally, I had an idea. I'm almost at 100. I'm in the 90s now. I've rented 90 DVDs, and then it finally hit me. Inuyasha, The Final Act. The library has it, right? I type in Inuyasha DVD. They have Inuyasha The Final Act. Give me 1 second. There's set 1. There's set 2. So thank you, TPL. You had Inuyasha The Final Act. So finally, I was able to see it. So how did I come to finally watching it now? Well, by maybe predestined fate, I started making a library list of movies and TV series that I've been meaning to see forever. And as I approached number 100, the number 1 series I've been meaning to watch that's been in the back of my mind for 15 years almost. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner, but I finally did think of it. And I was like, Inuyasha The Final Act, if they have it, this is going to be amazing. Lo and behold, they did. Now I've finally seen it. And there you go. That's how I finally got to see Inuyasha The Final Act now. I've been making a list of library rentals because I've been consuming content as a coping mechanism and just something to, keep me occupied while I've been grieving. We're in September now, but I've been grieving all year. And they happened to have the final act, and I finally thought of it, and here we are now. I'm making a video on it. But yeah, man, that's my history as an Inuyasha fan, and that's how I came to finally watching it now. I want to talk more about the show and what I love about the show before I start getting into the actual review of the final acts, because this video is about my experience as a fan. So we're going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about my history as an Inuyasha fan. Or not my history as an Inuyasha fan, what I love about Inuyasha. Sorry, I just talked about my history as an Inuyasha fan. We're not going to edit that. This has been such a long take. We're not going back to edit that. What I'm going to talk about now is what I love about the show of Inuyasha. Both the show itself, the history, and all that. That's what I love about Inuyasha in real life. This show has had everything I just talked about on this slide. That's what I love about Inuyasha in real life. It's had such a big impact on my life. That's what I love about it in real life. Now I want to talk about the actual content of the show and what I love about the actual content of the show. Okay, so on this slide I have a few points that of what I love and what I kind of dislike about the content of the show. The what I love is in red, and the what I dislike is in black, and we'll get to each of them. There's more about what I love than just in the bullet points, but let's get to it. First, what do I love about the show Inuyasha? Number one is its characters, and it has great characters. The characters of Inuyasha have great depth to their personality. Each of them are presented with the possibility of a great character journey and a great character arc and great character development. Um, they are unpredictable. They have great lore and background and story to them, and they all have great conflict with the show's main villain and with each other, which is, another one of the points is conflict, and we'll get more into that in a bit. But the characters are just they're well written characters, but they're also just likable characters and cool characters. Some of my favorites, Sesshomaru was always my favorite when I was originally a fan, and I have to say I'm quite thrilled with how they used him in the final act, and we'll get more into that when we get to the final act reviews. Inuyasha I always have loved, always. Kikyo, I know Kikyo is very hit or miss on the internet. Some people, like her hardcore fans are hardcore fans, but she has a lot of hardcore haters too. I don't know why. I've always loved Kikyo. Naraku is a fantastic villain. You got to give Naraku his props. Kagra is a very well written tweener, and that's another thing this show does so well is its tweener characters. If you don't know what a tweener character is, it's a character that's neither good nor bad. And anime in general, that's like an anime trope, is anime has a lot of tweener characters. Usually it's a like really highly skilled male that's neither with the good guys but not fully against them, but then eventually, like usually they start against them, but then they're kind of with them, kind of not, but then eventually they are with them. Like that's a big anime trope, like Vegeta and Dragon Ball. He's a tweener character because he starts off as a villain, then he's in between, then he's a hero in the end, but most of the time he's in between. That's what a tweener is. So think of like a Vegeta-like character. For Inuyasha, you would say that's Sesshomaru, but they have more than just Sesshomaru that's a tweener character. Kagra is a tweener. Kikyo is definitely a tweener. You could probably throw Koga in there into a little bit of a mix, but um, the point is I've always loved Sesshomaru. He's always been my favorite. Inuyasha Kikyo, Naraku, I mentioned Kagra, who's also just a great tweener character, very well written. You root for Kagra quite a lot. Um, but yeah, those are some of my favorites. The Band of Seven are really, really fun. I didn't write them down, but the Band of Seven are great. Um, there are also characters that I used to really not like, and I'll talk more about this when we get to the final act, but there were characters that I used to really, really not like, and I ended up liking them in the final act. And I don't know if that's because the final act did such a great job with them, or if it's just because it's been so long since I've watched the show that I appreciate seeing them now, especially now that I'm older, I'm wiser, I have more life experience, I have, maybe different perspectives that I didn't have as a teenager when I first was a fan, that like characters I used to not like, I now liked them in the final act. And I might as well throw out the examples. Kohaku. I hated Kohaku when I was a teenager. Absolutely hated Kohaku when I was a teenager. Um, I hated the episodes that I didn't hate the episodes that he was in, but I hated him when he showed up in the episodes that he was in. I really wanted them to kill Kohaku off. I did not like him as a teenager at all. I liked him in the final act. Again, I don't know if it's like the show did just such a much better job with him in the final act, or if it's that, I'm different now. It's one of the two. Maybe it's a bit of both, but I liked Kohaku in the final act. I used to like Kikyo way more than Kagome. I still like Kikyo more than Kagome, but I used to actively dislike Kagome when I was a teenager. I didn't dislike her in the final act. I quite liked her in the final act. She was one of the better characters in the final act. Um, and I enjoyed her quite a lot in it. Again, is it that I'm older and different and just, I'm a different person now? Or is it that she was much better in the final act in general? Maybe it's a bit of both, but I quite liked Kagome in the final act. But What do I love about Inuyasha? Its characters. It's got phenomenal characters. Its music. I talked about J-pop already and the J-pop influence on me. Like 10 to 12% of my iPod is J-pop. Do as Infinity. I have every single song of theirs ever recorded on my iPod. I got into J-pop because of Inuyasha, but it's not just the intro outro J-pops. The score of Inuyasha is fantastic. Um, the music and score backgrounds of Inuyasha are phenomenal. And one thing that they do great is using the score to help set the emotion and tone of the story. And Inuyasha is a pretty, I would describe the show as pretty emo, pretty gothic, pretty depressive in a way, but I would say there's like a feminine aura and a feminine energy to Inuyasha. Yeah, there are a lot of battles. Yeah, the main villain is a man. Yeah, the title character is a man. You know, yeah, there's a lot of masculine themes and energy, and of course there's, you know, the anime trope of perversion and, you know, kind of looking at females as sex objects and making sex jokes about the female characters. Like all of that like male masculine energy is in the show, but I think the spirit of Inuyasha, like the soul of Inuyasha, is more feminine than masculine. It's a very, the show has like a feminine energy and aura to it, because the soul of Inuyasha is not Inuyasha, it's not Naraku. The soul of Inuyasha is Kagome and Kikyo. They are the characters that really drive the show, in my opinion. Kagome is the main character of Inuyasha. Inuyasha is the title character, and he's the main character as well, but really it's Kagome's show. From the beginning to the end, it's really Kagome's show, even though the beginning conflict is Inuyasha, Naraku, Kikyo. But if you've seen the series, you know that Kagome is the main character and that Kikyo is kind of the driving factor of the show. That's what I mean by this like feminine energy, and I feel like the score really kind of illustrates that and helps bring that out, and makes that evident. But also the score, it does such a good job of directing audience emotion. When they want you to be cheerful and happy and laughing and joking around, they'll play like, you know, they'll have the part of the score that's more lighthearted and, you know, I don't want to describe it as bubbly, but just more upbeat score. But when they want you to be depressed, or they want you to cry, or they want you to be frustrated with emotions at what's going on, they have great scores to add to that. They of course have character driven themes where, you know, Naraku has his own theme that plays when he's on screen. Sesshomaru has his own theme that plays when he's on screen. Kikyo has her own theme that's played when she's on screen. Koga has his own theme that's played when he's on screen. They like for all these like, you know, kind of side characters that are, you know, reoccurring, like they have their themes that when that song plays, we know they're going to be on screen. So that's great. Um, but one thing about the score that I really want to shout out is the score incorporates background vocals into, you know, their regularly used songs to really enhance even more special moments. Like Kikyo's theme, when they really want to drive home that something sad is happening, especially involving her and Inuyasha or her and Kagome or whatever, they'll throw in Kikyo's theme and add background humming and background vocals, really faint background humming and background vocals to the song to really make it stand out. The music in Inuyasha is fantastic. The score is absolutely fantastic. I want to talk about the lore. The Inuyasha Kikyo Naraku background and origins, you know, how Naraku ultimately used trickery and, you know, tricks both of them into hating one another. He makes Kikyo think that Inuyasha landed the killing blow on her. He tricks Inuyasha into thinking that Kikyo's abandoned him and doesn't love him and is using him, and so Inuyasha goes and actually does steal the sacred jewel, and then Kikyo shows up thinking that Inuyasha tried to kill her and is seeing him steal the jewel, and then she arrows him to the sacred tree, and that all started because Naraku, who was originally Onigumo, was in love with Kikyo, but then he grew to hate her and despise her, and he gave himself up to, the demons, and he became Naraku, and he used this trickery, which would be a common theme with Naraku with every other character. He'd use that same trickery, and he'd use that same manipulation, and he'd use, he would use death and trickery and manipulation to get under the skin and build conflicts with all the other characters. So won't get into that, but that background lore, Inuyasha was in love with Kikyo, Kikyo was in love with Inuyasha. Naraku, her Onigumo becomes Naraku and he tricks them both. And Kikyo seals Inuyasha to the tree, and she dies with the sacred jewel, wishing to see Inuyasha again. So she's reborn as Kagome, who comes back to the feudal era because the sacred jewel is in her soul. And as she comes back to the feudal era, the sacred jewel comes out, and now she's on this adventure with Inuyasha because he wakes up at the tree. It's such a simple yet effective lore, and it sets up the entire series. Like, all that is pretty much, they do backstory and flashback episodes to dive into that, all of them, like as the series goes on. But that's all pretty much established in the very first episode. And then they give more, details on it as the series goes on as needed. But it's such a simple setup to the lore that drives the show forward. But it's not just that lore that's great. There's so much other lore that's great. The Inuyasha Sesshomaru lore of Tetsaiga and Tenseiga, and how their father left each of those swords to them, and how one is a sword of healing and is a sword of battle, and the sword of battle was not given to the full demon warrior. It was rather given to the half human, half demon boy who has no place in this world. He's not accepted by humans. He's not accepted by demons. His own older brother doesn't accept him and wants to kill him. So how is his father going to ensure his survival? He's going to leave him the warrior sword Tetsaiga, and now this half demon, half human, non-accepted character has the means to defend himself and the means to become a warrior so that he can ensure his own survival. And the sword of healing, the sword of, compassion, is left to the full-blooded, full demon warrior who has no compassion. He has no ability to heal. He has no ability to love. And that sword is going to teach him those things. It's going to teach him compassion. It's going to teach him love. And these two swords, they clash with one another in the sense that as long as Sesshomaru has the sword of healing, he can't kill Inuyasha. And as long as Inuyasha has, the sword of, we'll call it the sword of destruction, but the battle sword, he can't kill Sesshomaru because Sesshomaru has the sword of healing, and thus he can't die at the hands of Tetsaiga, at least. But he pretty much can't die in general, but especially at the hands of Tetsaiga. And the swords were given to each of them individually as characters with purpose, but also against each other with purpose, because now they can't kill each other and will eventually learn to, coexist amongst each other, which is just, it's such great, simple, yet effective lore. Naraku's conflicts, giving Moroku the generational curse of the wind tunnel, tricking Sesshomaru and pretty much everyone, slaying the wolf demon tribes, holding Kagra and Kana hostage, creating all these conflicts with all the different characters throughout the show. It's such simple yet effective lore. The lore of this show is just fantastic. The cast, the English voice cast, I know not a lot of people love, English dubs in anime, but Inuyasha has a great English dub, and the English voice cast is fantastic. Every single casted voice actor fits their character to a T. They're all absolutely perfect. I'm just shouting out the cast as a whole, but all of them are perfect. You can literally pick out any of them and shout them out because they're great. Inuyasha, great. Sesshomaru, great. Moroku, great. Kagome, Kikyo, Sango, all of them are great. Naraku, fantastic. The voice cast is perfectly and expertly cast to their specific character. The English dub of Inuyasha is one of the better English dubs in all of anime, and one of the reasons for that is because the voice cast is phenomenal and play the characters amazing. Um, the crews, all the different crews of Inuyasha, like you have Inuyasha's crew, which is himself, Kagome, Sango, Moroku, Kilala, Shippo, um, Miyoga, Totosai, kind of. But that's the Inuyasha crew. Then you have the Sesshomaru crew, which is Sesshomaru, Master Jokin, Rin, Aun, Totosai, kind of. And that's the Sesshomaru crew. Kagra, kind of. That's the Sesshomaru crew. You have Koga, the leader of the wolf demons. I don't remember his followers' names. It's because it's been so long since I've watched the actual series. They were in the final act, but I don't recall their name from the final act either. Mostly because I just wasn't really paying attention to the two of them that much. But you have Koga and his wolf demon crew. Then you have Kikyo, and that's the main, like the four main crews of Inuyasha. The Inuyasha crew, the Sesshomaru crew, Koga crew, and then Kikyo. And that's like the four different like characters that you're, or groups of characters or character that you're following throughout the show, and all of them have their conflict with Naraku. But then you have wild cards, Kohaku and his connection with Sango, and um, Naraku tricking Kohaku into killing, the Demon Slayer family, Sango's family. So the Sango's brother killing, her father and all the other demon slayers, and now he's under Naraku's control, but sometimes he's not under Naraku's control, and the Kohaku that Sango loved is still somewhere in there. He's a wild card throughout the series, and that adds to the conflict and to the lore as well. You have Kagra as a wild card, like she wants to be free of Naraku, but he has her under his grasp. He can kill her at any time. She can't leave, but she wants to help everyone else kill him, and she wants to, be free. And at the opportune moment, she will turn on Naraku if that opportunity presents itself. She's a wild card, and it goes back to the characters, the lore, the conflicts. This is all things that I absolutely love about the Inuyasha show. And I'll quickly throw out this. My favorite season is season 2. I talked about season 2 earlier. I love season 2. Such a great season. I have 2 copies of it on DVD. The original copy that I originally bought, I still have that. Those discs have been viewed so many times that they don't really work, those ones, but I did get a replacement copy of season 2 for my collection. But I did keep the original copies because I just wanted to keep it for memory's sake. So I have 2 copies of season 2. But season 2 is my favorite season. I love the Band of Seven saga or arc or whatever you want to call it. I just loved the Band of Seven saga of Inuyasha. So that's up there, and I have to say the final act, which I still haven't gotten to my review of yet, but the final act, it's probably the best season of Inuyasha overall, let's be honest. So that I'm going to throw in there as things that I love as well. Season 2, the Band of Seven, and the final act. Now, I just want to quickly get into things that I dislike about the show, and things that I think are weak points of the actual content. So we just talked about all the strengths of the content and things I love. Here are things that I think are a little bit weak about the show. And they're relevant because I put them in here because I think the final act kind of fixes almost all of these issues. And we'll get into that more when we get into the final act review. But things that I dislike about the show is that it drags on. The conflict of Inuyasha, and ultimately Naraku is the main villain throughout the entire series. And it kind of, the cat and mouse chase of finding Naraku and, this sacred jewel being built up from, all the different shards being found and put together, and, the sacred jewel becoming whole again, and Naraku's conflict with all the different characters, it really drags on. Like, 7 seasons is a long time for one arc, And so they have to throw in a ton of filler. The Band of Seven is technically filler, like they're filler villains. Um, so in filler, you have filler villains, like filler arcs, like the Band of Seven. As much as I love it, and I put it in under love, it's technically a filler arc, right? Like they're filler villains. They're there to fill in time before we get to Naraku, Hakudoshi, filler. Like all these like characters are kind of filler. Like these arcs, these characters, they're all filler. But then they're between that, like that actually, like those are like actual arcs with beginning, middle, and ends that are over several episodes and are like whole season longs. There are actual filler episodes, and Inuyasha has a ton of filler episodic episodes, like episodes that have a beginning, middle, and end that have nothing to do with the main conflict of the show or main storyline of the show, and don't push the main conflict or main storyline of the show forward in any manner whatsoever. Genuinely simple filler episodic episodes that you can skip them all together and you miss nothing because they have nothing to do with the main conflict. And each of the 7 seasons of Inuyasha are filled with filler episodic episodes. So not only do they have filler arcs because the whole, storyline of Inuyasha is stretched out so much that they actually have to have filler arcs, but they have filler episodes and a ton of them that are episodic and just pointless episodes altogether. The show, we talked about all the different, characters and character groups that we're following. Well, they have too many of them. They have too many heroes, too many tweeners, and too many villains. Naraku, you know, all his incarnations, there's so many of them. There's too many characters. And because they're all kind of intertwined in one conflict, it gets to be very convoluted, and it gets to be very unfocused at times. And it's like, oh yeah, this character has this beef as well that we need to follow, or this character has this storyline that we need to follow as well. And there's genuinely too many characters. And again, I'm mentioning all this because the final act fixes all these problems. Um, and the other thing is there's too many fake out deaths, too many false deaths. Inuyasha, throughout the series, has so many moments where it looks like a main character or side character is going to die and then they don't, or they do die and then they come back, or they're about to die but then they're saved, or something happens and they don't die. Just however you want to say it, and all the different variations of it that happens, there's too many fake deaths, too many false deaths, too many fake out deaths. You think someone's going to die and then they don't. And that happens quite a lot in Inuyasha, and I think it's kind of a weak point of a show. Doing that once or twice for dramatic purposes is one thing, but Inuyasha does that like once or twice or 3 times a season almost. Not like once or twice or 3 times throughout the series. Like they do it that many times per season. There are fake out deaths in the final act, by the way, but all these problems I think are kind of fixed by the final act. And I only include these because I think the final act fixes all these issues, but also because no show is perfect. And part of loving a show is not just loving it for what it's great at, but loving it for its flaws. And, younger people might not understand that, but as you get older, you kind of learn that part of love is loving flaws. And I love this thing in spite of its flaws, or I love this thing including its flaws. Whatever you want to, both of those things, but however you want to say it, but it's all of that. And it's like Inuyasha is a flawed show. It's not a perfect show. It is a flawed show. It has flaws. I think the story was stretched out way longer than it needed to be. You probably could have told the entire story of Naraku and everyone else in like 4 seasons instead of 8. Maybe 5 if we're being generous, but it's a stretched out story that, because of it, has a lot of filler, both in arcs and in episodes. It has way too many characters to follow. and it does have a lot of false deaths and dramatic moments that you think are meaningful, but they don't really matter because they're reversed or they're retconned or they're fixed or whatever. So is it a perfect show? No, it's not a perfect show, but I love it anyways. And all of the positives that I listed outweighs the negatives. Um, I think it's that simple. I think there are way more positives, and I think the positive things are more of a positive things than the negative things are a negative thing. So, is it a flawed show? Yes. Is it a perfect show? No. But it has way more positives than negatives, and I love it despite its flaws. And its flaws are important because I think the final act fixed almost all those flaws. Okay, so what do I love about the final act? We're finally getting to the review part of Inuyasha The Final Act. This part will be non-spoilers. I'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum in this part of the video. I'll give a verbal spoiler warning when we get to spoiler parts of the video, but we just talked about some of the flaws of the show as a whole that I think this series, like Inuyasha The Final Act, it's technically a sequel series, but it's only one season, and for me, it's just season 8. It's just instead of being called season 8, it's called Inuyasha The Final Act. I think it fixes almost all the flaws that the first 7 seasons have. Um, one thing for me, and this is relevant to some of the things that I love about the final act, is I haven't watched Inuyasha in like 14 years. Like 2010, 2011 was the last time I ever watched Inuyasha. And it's been in the back of my head that I need to watch the final act for that many years. And I've already talked about that in earlier in the video. But I came up with the opportunity to watch the final act now spur of the moment. Um, I didn't go back and watch the first 7 seasons before watching the final act. Um, I briefly thought about it before I rented the final act from the library. I was like, I could rent these whenever. I could spend, a month or 2 months watching the first 7 seasons of Inuyasha before watching the final act so I can be completely caught up on it. Because it has been like 14 years since I've watched the show. So part of me was like, should I watch the 7 seasons again? It's been like over a decade since I've seen them. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the risk that the final act, that as soon as I see all the characters again, I'll be like, my memory will be triggered. Because I was like, I still remember the basic lores of Inuyasha, obviously, because I was such a huge fan of it. And I went through in my head, I'm like, okay, if I can name all the characters going into the final act off my top of my head, then I don't need to go back and rewatch it. I can just jump into renting it now. So I was like, Inuyasha, Kagome, Moroku, Sango, Kilala, Shippo, Kikyo, Kagura, Hakidoshi, Naraku, Sesshomaru, Rin, Aun, Master Jokin, Koga, um, Kagra, Kana, and I was like, okay, I'm good. Like, I've got all the characters. I remember what was going on. I remember how season 7 ended and the characters that were around. And obviously, like I said, I know the main lore, like, because I was such a huge fan for so long. I'm like, okay, I'm good. Hopefully, I can just watch the final act and I'll be good. Which brings me to the first thing that I want to mention about Inuyasha the Final Act. It catches everyone up on everything beautifully. And it does this several ways. Number one, the first episode, it dives in slowly. It kind of gives you like a moment with each character to remember them all and remember what's going on. And throughout the series, they use dialogue, flashbacks, um, they use dialogue exposition, flashback exposition, and they perfectly um, pace the show that allows us to catch up on everything. It's been 14 years since I've seen Inuyasha, And it feels like Inuyasha The Final Act was designed for me to have not seen it for 14 years and still be caught up. It's like the show knew I hadn't seen it in 14 years, and it caught me up on everything through its pacing, through the dialogue expositions it offered, through the flashbacks of the show, that it offered, and even the flashbacks and dialogue exposition of everything going on in the final act itself. Now, for a first time viewing of the final act, I loved this because it literally caught me all up. And I will say this, before the final act, it's been 13, 14 years since I've seen the show. It felt like yesterday that I just watched the show with watching the final act. It felt like the last time I watched it was yesterday. That's how good of a job it does catching you up. Now, for a first time viewing, this is amazing and I love this and it's phenomenal. I don't know how many times I'm going to watch the final act in my lifetime, to be completely honest with you, but I assume that the next time I watch it, because I probably will watch it a second time at least, I assume this next time I watch it will be after I watch the first 7 seasons. Like, I'll just watch the show from beginning to end all in a row on DVD, because I do plan on buying the final act on DVD to add to my collection. So, considering that that's the next time I'll see it, and like the third time I see it will probably be the same way, this might not be so much of a positive for me. Because one thing I can't stand is when shows or movies that I'm overly familiar with doing tons of dialogue exposition or flashback exposition or pacing exposition to like be like, remember what's going on? Like, I kind of hate that when it's something I'm super familiar with. However, I appreciated it in the final act because it's been so long since I've watched Inuyasha that it caught me up. So if you haven't seen Inuyasha in a long time and you haven't seen the final act, don't worry, you don't need to go watch the whole 7 season series again. You don't even need to do an abbreviated watch through of the series. You can just jump into the final act. It will catch you up on everything while, and this is the brilliant part about it jumps right in. It does a quick catch you up and it keeps catching you up through the season, but it's off to the races fast, man. Like, they don't waste any time. Like, the first episode, major things happen in the very first episode. It jumps in quick and it's off to the races fast, combined with making sure you're caught up and combined with making sure you're kept caught up. They jump right into the story fast. We talked about how the story of Inuyasha throughout the series is kind of stretched out. It's not stretched out in the final act. They jump right in. And they're focused from the very first episode to the 26th episode. They have 26 episodes to tell this story and to tell the ending to these characters and to this story and to this conflict. And they jump right in and it's off to the races fast. We talked about how there's lots of filler in Inuyasha. Well, even the filler connects to the story now. There are 3, maybe 4 episodes of Inuyasha The Final Act out of 26 that could be quote unquote filler episodes, maybe. But even those 3 to 4 filler episodes, they now connect to the larger story going on. They actually have things that happen in them that matter to the main story now. They have things that happen to characters that matter to the main story now. Even the filler connects to the story now. Is it entirely filler? No, because it connects to the main story. Is it things that they could have, trimmed down or not spent as much time doing? Probably. Maybe 1 or 2 things they could have just eliminated from the season or series altogether. But even the filler connects to the main story now, and even the filler drives characters forward now. So they solved that problem too. And we talked about how there's too many characters in the series, and there's too many characters involved in the main conflict of the story. Well, the final act trims the roster down to focus on all the most important characters, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the spoiler part of the review. But whether it's through writing a character off, or killing a character off, or just using them far less than how often they were used in the original series, either writing them out of the show, killing them off of the show, or completely cutting down on how much they're being used. They trim the roster big time in the final act. Not immediately, but as the series, takes place, or how as the season goes on, they cut the roster down big time. And they do it in respectful manners too. They cut down the roster to focus on the most important characters. It's like as if the writers and the team behind it were like, okay, who are the most important characters in this conflict, and who do we want the most important characters to be when we get to the final conflict, the final confrontation, the final battle? Who do we want involved? Let's focus on them, the most important characters, and let's trim everyone else down. But as we trim the roster down and get rid of characters and push them off to the side, let's give them mini conclusions to their arcs, to their storylines, and let's make sure their fans have something, some bit of closure with these characters that we're going to push off to the side while we focus on the most important ones. So not only do they trim the roster down to focus on the most important characters, which is a good thing, they give conclusions to all the characters that they end up pushing aside, which is so fantastically put together, so fantastically structured. The writing of this show is just absolutely fantastic, to be completely honest. And we just talked about trimming the roster down. The deaths, and I'm not going to say who they are yet. We'll get to that when we get to spoilers, but the deaths, they're permanent and they matter. There's no death in the final act where they come back. When the characters die in the final act, they're done. They're dead. So when they die, you think, okay, because of how the series has gone before this, they're going to show up, they're going to pop up. They don't. Once they're dead, they're gone. That's it. That's their ending. And in fiction, when you overuse reviving of death, you can get yourself into trouble of consequences don't mean anything, they don't matter. That's not an issue in the final act because all the characters that die remain dead permanently. So, like, that's another super positive thing about the final act. And the best thing about the final act, the best things about the final act are this: all characters have a purpose. Every single character has a purpose. We talked about Inuyasha's crew: Inuyasha, Kagome, Moroku, Shippo, Sango, Kilala, Myoga. That's 7. And then you have Kohaku, who's kind of with them, kind of not. That's 8. That's 7 or 8 characters. It's 6 constantly, but 7 or 8 characters in your group. When groups are that large in anime, you end up with a trope of characters that are there but are not active participants. You know, that they're standing on the sidelines commentating, but they're not involved, you know. And for the longest time in Inuyasha, Moroku and Sango were not really involved. Like, they were always there, but they weren't being involved. Their story in the conflict was not being added to, and their usefulness in the group in battles has not really been as abundant as it was when they first joined the group. Moroku and Sango by the end of season 7 of Inuyasha had become side characters that are there every episode, but they're not actively participating, and they're not actively making an impact on the plot, right? And this is a problem in all of anime with characters in the group that ultimately become, they're non-participants in the main, conflict of the story, in the sense that they're not adding to it, and they're not causing, changes to the story. They're not having impacts on it, is what I'm trying to say. The final act fixes that. Every character that are part of those main most important characters that we talked about, how they trim the roster down to focus on the most important characters. All of those most important characters have an important place and they have a purpose, and they do impact the story, they do impact the conflict, they change the conflict, they're involved, they all have a purpose, and each and every single character gets a weapon or story upgrade in the final act. This is kind of spoilers, but Inuyasha Sesshomaru both get new weapons or upgrades to their current weapons. Sango's Hiraya coats gets an upgrade. Moroku is, he has story changes, and I don't want to get into too bit of spoilers here. I'm just cause I'm trying to avoid spoilers at this part of the video, but Kohaku, things happen with him that changes. Koga gets a weapon upgrade. They all kind of have changes and upgrades that either are weapon upgrades, character upgrades, story upgrades that involves them into the plot and gives them a purpose in it. And it's so expertly crafted and written, and you gotta appreciate it. And I love that about the final act. And even more important than all the characters having a purpose, this is a real problem with lots of anime and Inuyasha in the past, but all plots have a purpose and all plot points piece together. Nothing happens in the final act that is important for 1 or 2 episodes only and then forgotten about. That happens quite a lot in Inuyasha, where something is important for 1, maybe 2 episodes, or maybe a season or half a season, etc. And this is a problem in all of anime. But then it's kind of forgotten about, and then it doesn't really matter anymore. That's not the case in the final act. When plot points are introduced and little moments of plot happen in the show, they matter. They all piece together. All plot points have a purpose in Inuyasha The Final Act. They don't introduce a single plot point that is wasted or unnecessary. Every single plot point is designed to have an impact on what's happening from episode 1 through episode 26. And when that plot point is brought in, it's all of this is going to piece together. It's all going to circle back. They're putting out a trail of breadcrumbs, and all those breadcrumbs will come together for a big payoff. And in that sense, Inuyasha The Final Act is the best written season in all of Inuyasha. I love all those things about Inuyasha The Final Act, and I have to say, in my opinion, Inuyasha The Final Act is the best season of Inuyasha in terms of how it's structured, the choices they make, and just how it's written in general. Inuyasha The Final Act is, in my opinion, the strongest season in all of Inuyasha. And it's been 14 years since I've watched seasons 1 through 7, but I remember them. I love season 2 to this day. I haven't watched it in years, but I love it to this day. The Band of Seven saga I love to this day, but Inuyasha The Final Act, it is just simply the best written season in all of Inuyasha. It is. And all of those things are what I love about Inuyasha The Final Act. It is the best written season in all of Inuyasha. I absolutely loved it. Okay, so we're going to get into a bit of spoilers at this point in the video, and as you see here on this slide, Kagura, Kikyo, Kana, and we talked about how deaths are permanent and how characters are written out of the show and how the roster is trimmed. They do that for both heroes and villains and tweeners. Whether you're a hero, whether you're a villain, whether you're a tweener, they trim the roster down in the final act. And we talked about deaths being permanent. All 3 of these characters die in the final act. Kikyo dies in the final act and she doesn't return. Kikyo has a lot of deaths in Inuyasha and she always comes back for them. Not this time. When she dies in the final act, she stays dead, and it was a very, very sad and very emotional moment, especially because I had, one of my best friends, probably the best friend I've ever had, and a former girlfriend, all the same person, passed away this year. I talked about that earlier in the video. So when Kikyo died, I knew exactly what Inuyasha was going through, and I knew exactly what, his friends were going through as they saw her pass. It was a tough death to watch. And I did expect Kikyo to come back later in the season, but she didn't. She stayed dead. And it was a tough death, and it was a hard moment to watch. It was definitely an emotional part of the show. Kagra had the first kind of hero slash tweener death of the season. The actual first death of the season is Hakudoshi. They kill off Hakudoshi in the very first episode of the final act. It's not just heroes or tweeners that they were getting out of the way, they were cutting down on villains too. If the villains didn't have a purpose or wasn't part of the grand vision of the final act, they got them out of the way too. And Hakudoshi actually gets killed off in the very first episode of the final act, which I was stunned by, because I was going into the final act thinking that Hakudoshi was going to play a major role. He's not. He doesn't. He's dead in the first episode. But in terms of the tweeners and heroes, the first one to die is Kagra, and it was a pretty emotional death. And to be honest, I kind of expected Sesshomaru to use Tenseiga on her to save her, which I thought was going to happen definitely at some point in the show. They definitely hinted at a romance. Excuse me, they definitely hinted at a romance between Kagra and Sesshomaru for, many seasons in Inuyasha. And I always thought, eventually one day Sesshomaru would use Tenseiga to revive Kagra, and then she would officially join, his grouping, probably after Naraku was dead. But um, he shows up and he watches her die, but he doesn't use Tenseiga. They added some dialogue of how Tenseiga's unable to save her, which they had it to do for exposition of why he's not using it. But I don't really buy it. I mean, I don't know. I don't really get why Tenseiga can't save her in that moment. It doesn't really make sense, to be completely honest. Um, so I was kind of just shocked that Sesshomaru didn't just save her with Tenseiga, which he probably could have and should have, but it didn't happen, and Kagra ended up dying off permanently. And then Kana was the third to go. Yeah, I think it was Kagra went first, then, Hakudoshi went first, then Kagra, and I think Kikyo was third, and then Kana. Um, I can't remember which one, where the order of the episodes of which one went first between Kana and Kikyo. It doesn't really matter. But when Kana died, it was surprisingly emotional too. Kagra's death was a gut punch. Kikyo's death was almost unbearable, and Kana's death was like, it was just so like, why do you have to kill Kana off? Like that's like the thought you're having. And Kana's a character that's like soulless, right? Like that's kind of her thing. Like she's a character without a soul, but she does have a soul. She misses her sister. She misses Kagra, and she's living with pain ever since Kagra died. And she doesn't really want to live without Kagra, so she kind of lets herself die easily so she can be free like her sister is. And it was like a beautiful little death for Kana that they gave her. Like the last two episodes featuring her, you again, this is a character that for has been in the series a long time at this point and had become kind of like, we talked about how Moroku and Sango were like characters that were there but not involved. Kana was that on the villain side for a long time, but they really wanted to give her like moments of closure in this season. They added, um, a new tool to her arsenal as a villain when she fought against Inuyasha, that made the battle like really, important for Inuyasha to win and hard for Inuyasha to win. And it was part of his, getting an upgrade to Dragon Scale Tetsaga and everything. But Kana, Kana's death was surprisingly emotional, that they were able to take a soulless character a character who doesn't have a soul and give her a soul and make you care about her and make you sympathize for her and make you be like, oh, did you guys really have to kill off Kana? That sucks. And it was a sad death, and she never came back either. I think all three of these deaths are really, really sad, to be honest. Kagra, like I said, was a gut punch. Kikyo was pretty much unbearable. And Kana was like, it was such a sad, like, did you guys really have to do that type thing? Now, there are death fake outs in the final act. Kohaku and Rin and Moroku, all three of them have, fake out deaths where it looks like they're going to die or they're about to die, but then they don't. Rin and Kohaku actually both die temporarily, but then come back. Um, so there are death fake outs in the final act, but it's not like they die and then they come back episodes later. They die and then they come back that episode. So it's like they don't ever end an episode on a death and then, bring them back later. That doesn't happen at all. They it's not a death it's more like dramatic psych outs where it's like, oh, they look like they're gonna die, but then they don't, even though they kind of die for moments. But it's not. I don't see it the same way as I see the death fake outs from earlier in the seasons because, like I said, it's all dealt with in individual episodes instead of like them coming back later on in the series, which is just kind of like, okay, so their death doesn't matter. That's not a thing. So while Kohaku, Rin, and Moroku all kind of have death fake outs, it's more for dramatic purposes rather than like, non consequences type thing. But these three deaths, Kana, Kagra, and Kikyo, they were tough. So I gotta shout them out because they were all tough deaths to watch. And we talked about trimming the characters. Um, one character I was never a huge fan of was Koga. I thought of all the different side characters in the series, whether it was, Kikyo or Sesshomaru or, Kagra slash Kana. I kind of thought, or Kohaku. Kohaku I hated, but it was kind of like I love to hate Kohaku. Koga was just one I just never liked. And, he was given a weapon upgrade early in the final act from the Wolf Demon tribe. And you're like, okay, so this is how Koga is going to be useful throughout the season. But he wasn't involved. He wasn't part of the final conflict because they wanted to trim the roster down and focus on, the characters that mattered the most. And I think that probably whether it was the original creator or a team of writers at this point, whatever, whoever, however it came to be at this point, I think they probably were like, okay, we have to choose between Koga and Sesshomaru. One of them is going to be heavily involved, the other one is going to be written out of the show because we have too many characters going on here, and we kind of have to just focus on the most important ones for the final conflict. They chose Sesshomaru. They got rid of Koga pretty early in the final act. He was given his weapon upgrade, and it looked like, okay, this is how he's going to be useful. And he did fight against Naraku in moments and fight alongside Inuyasha in moments, and he was there for Kikyo's death. But he was gone. He was gone quickly after that. He was there for like the first half of the season, and then just completely written out for the second half of the season. And this is the last one of the last line of dialogue he has when he's trying to console Inuyasha, who after Kikyo's death, and he's like, try to imagine how I'm feeling for leaving Kagome behind. And when he said that, I'm like, are they writing Koga out of the show? Is he done now? Is this like it for him? They do kind of bring him back for like, a closure moment at the end of the season, but yeah, they write him out. He's not involved in the final conflict or the final battle at all. And I'm like, that's kind of awesome because like he's always been the least interesting character for me. And if it, my suspicions, like I said, is like they probably were like, we have to choose between Koga and Sesshomaru. They picked the right one going with Sesshomaru. And Koga was written out of the final act. Um, like I said, he was in like the first half, but then he was written out. So his character was like, they cut down on his usage for the final acts and expanded on Sesshomaru's. Sesshomaru, especially in the second half of the season, is heavily involved. And I was quite surprised because Sesshomaru was always my favorite character in Inuyasha. And the final act really elevated his character and they really involved him more in the plot and more in the conflict. And Sesshomaru had such a big impact on the final act. So, like the final act, how it's structured and what happens in it, you can't do it without Sesshomaru. You can't take Sesshomaru out of the final act and it still be the final act. It would have to be something completely different. They'd have to structure it differently. They'd have to write a bunch of different storylines. Like he's heavily involved. And you think like, okay, I thought he after the Meiho-san Getsusa, I'm pronouncing that stupidly, but Meiso-san Getsuha, again, I'm pronouncing that terribly, but the technique that started with Tenseiga but then went to Tetsaiga all in this season, after Meiho-san Getsusa went from Sesshomaru to Inuyasha, you're like, okay, that's Sesshomaru's part in the show. No, that's just the start of his part in the show. He's involved even further after that. He gets his own new sword. He doesn't abandon Tenseiga. He still continues to use Tenseiga. Tenseiga still has a purpose in the final conflict, which is expertly written, by the way, when the sacred jewel becomes the entity that it becomes, and only Tenseiga can defeat it. And Inuyasha and Kagome are relying on Sesshomaru to defeat this entity for them so Kagome can get her spiritual powers back and her ability to purify back. And so Inuyasha can go back can get his demon blood under control, can go back to his normal self. Like Sesshomaru's role is so heavily expanded in the final act. Like I said, you can't do the final act without Sesshomaru. You can do it without Koga, and they did most of it without Koga. They gave him his moment, they gave him his upgrade, they had him involved for the parts that they could have him involved in, but once Naraku gets Koga's sacred jewel shards, he's done. After Kikyo dies and Naraku gets Koga's jewel shards, Koga's out. He's out of the show from that point on. And like I said, they're focusing on the characters that matter the most. And ultimately, between all those deaths we just talked about, and between Koga being written out of the show, the characters they decided mattered the most were Inuyasha, Sesshomaru, Kagome, who are pretty much the main three characters of like the final conflict, but Inuyasha, Sesshomaru, Kagome, Moroku, Sango, Shippo, Kohaku, Aun, Jokin, Rin, very important, um, Kilala. These are the characters that matter the most. And there's this beautiful shot. I'm gonna show pictures of it later in the video, but there's a beautiful shot of all these characters getting together in the final battle. You see Sesshomaru, you see Jokin, Aun, Rin, Kohaku, you see Inuyasha, Kagome, Shippo, you see Moroku, you see Sango. All these characters coming together. Kilala, I can't remember if I mentioned her in that group or not, but you have all these heroes coming together. It's essentially Inuyasha's crew and Sesshomaru's crew. And it's all of them facing off against Naraku. They do a bunch of cool shots where they pan across all the heroes from over Naraku's shoulder. They do a pan from behind all the heroes, behind their shoulders up to Naraku. You see close-ups of all their different faces as they stare off against Naraku. And it's such a cool moment of it's like, the show is basically like these are all the characters that matter, and in my opinion, they picked all the right ones. The only one that I feel should have been there and wasn't was Kikyo. That's it. I feel like Kikyo could have been and should have been there. She wasn't. Because ultimately, when I originally watched Inuyasha, and how the show is structured and how all these characters have these conflicts with Naraku and you have all these different groups. I thought we would get a battle similar to what we got in the final act, but I thought like everyone would be there. You'd have Inuyasha's crew of Inuyasha, Kagome, Moroku, Sango, Shippo, Kilala. You'd have Sesshomaru, Aun, Jokin, Rin. You'd have Koga and his two wolf tribe companions. You'd have Kikyo. You'd have Kagra. You'd have Kana. And I thought you would have every single one of these characters for this final battle, where every single one of these characters would play a part in the battle. And I feel like the final battle that happens in the final act, you could have had all those characters there for it, but it would be the way that those last several episodes inside Naraku and how that battle was structured. If you had every single one of those characters, I think it's like they do like 5 episodes inside Naraku, right? It's like 4 or 5 episodes inside Naraku. If you had all those characters there, you probably have to make it like 8 or 9, just because of all the added characters and all the different parts that they'd have to play. But you could have done it, and the show probably was like, we could do it, but we're gonna get rid of half of them before we even get there. So they get rid of Kikyo, they get rid of Kagra, they get rid of Kana, they get rid of Koga, and they pretty much right there cut, all that like final battle roster in half. So you can focus on basically Inuyasha's crew and Sesshomaru's crew. And it's hard enough, even just with all those characters, to make sure every single one's involved and it's not just Inu, Sesshomaru, and Kagome, but every single one of them. And the show figured out how to make sure every single one of them was involved, which I adored completely. So we talk about Koga leaving the show and Kana and Kagra and Kikyo leaving the show. Well, their sacrifices, whether it's through death or being written out of the show, allowed Inuyasha and his crew and Sesshomaru and his crew to get the spotlight and to all have an impact on the conclusion of this entire series, which I think is fantastic. And as a Sesshomaru fan, and my favorite character dynamic in the show has always been Inuyasha Sesshomaru. We got to see Inuyasha and Sesshomaru fight one last time inside Naraku's body, and they switched it. They switched it so that Sesshomaru is the good guy and Inuyasha is the bad guy, because Inuyasha got he's first of all, he's a full demon, but he also got corrupted by the sacred jewels. So Sesshomaru is now the good guy, and now we as an audience have to root for Sesshomaru, because if Sesshomaru doesn't defeat the sacred jewel entity and get him out of Inuyasha with Kagome, we're not winning this final battle. We need Sesshomaru to win this fight with Inuyasha, and we did get to see them fight one last time, and they did it with Sesshomaru as the hero. We got to see, Shippo and Kohaku and Jokin were all left behind earlier, like as they all head to Naraku, but Shippo, Jokin, and Kohaku all decide to, no, we're going in and we're going to go in and help them, and they all go in with a purpose. Kohaku and Aun, when they enter, they save Rin. If it wasn't for them, Rin would have died. They save Rin in the final battle. Um, if and Kohaku also has to supply his gas mask to Moroku, so that was also a necessity. Shippo has the miasma antidote, which he gives to Sango, Moroku, and Kilala as they're dying from miasma. So Shippo coming in was necessary, because not only is it important for his character that, no, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to go show up to help my friends, but he has a purpose of being there. So all these characters that were left originally, they're like, no, we're going to be brave and help our friends. They have a purpose for entering. They're involved. Kohaku and Aun, they save Rin's life. If they're not there, she falls to her death, or she's killed by Sango's Harai coats. If Shippo doesn't enter with the miasma antidote, Sango, Kilala, and Moroku, they all die of miasma poisoning. So they not only enter for that moment of bravery but they have a purpose once they enter, and their involvement and their showing up is necessary for the victory in the end. So the point is, all those characters that were sacrificed, it was so the characters that we all love, Inuyasha and Sesshomaru's crew, could get the spotlight, and all of them could have their important moments in the finale of the show. So thank you to Koga, thank you to Kana, thank you to Kagra, and thank you to Kikyo for making room for all those important characters to have their conclusion in the finale of Inuyasha The Final Act. Okay, so just excuse my hair. I just got out of the shower, so that's why it's looking wet as it is. But now is the time. I'm sitting down to finish this. This was disc set 1. This is disc set 2. I'm on the last disc of this, which means I'm down to the last 6 episodes of Inuyasha The Final Act, and truth of the matter is, I was like, I had the time and the ability to finish it last night. I didn't. I was putting it off. I was not mentally and emotionally ready for it yet, and I probably am not emotionally or mentally ready for it even now, but I just don't want to put it off too long. Part of me was tempted to return them now and say, hey, I didn't finish it. I still had 6 episodes left. I can prolong this even more. I can prolong this not seeing the final act, for another, few years until I buy it or whatever. But no, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to, I'm going to miss it though. I'm going to miss, the thought in the back of my mind of, you need to see the Inuyasha The Final Act, you need to see how Inuyasha ends, you need to order the final act, blah blah blah, all those thoughts. Those lingering back of my mind thoughts that have been in my mind for 14 years now, and I'm gonna miss it. I'm gonna miss, knowing that it's still there for me to see. Eventually, I'm gonna miss that, and I'm gonna miss, spending time with these characters. Like, this is it, right? Like, it's over after this. So, will I ever see them again? Not in anything new, unless there's a reboot. But if there's a reboot, it's not really the same thing. It's not the same, story. It's not the same set of characters. But it really does feel like saying goodbye to a group of friends, and it does feel like, I'm putting a close on a chapter of my life. It feels like a certain part of my life is coming to an end with viewing this. And I know that sounds silly. It's just, an anime show, but that's how I feel, and that's why I was putting it off, and, why it's a bit emotional right now. But I'm going to sit down and watch it. There will probably be some tears, both hopefully from the content itself, but even if the content itself doesn't bring them out, which it probably will, just the reflection on life will probably bring it out when it comes to an end. But in all of that being said, I'm looking forward to this. Naraku's got the sacred jewel now. It's fully intact. Naraku at the last episode before these, on the last episode of that other disc in this set, saw Naraku successfully achieve the full sacred jewel. It's completely tainted. Kikyo's light is no longer in it. It's completely in Naraku's grasp. We're truly in the final acts now. There's so many parallels to Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame with Inuyasha The Final Act. I wonder if anybody's ever noticed that before, but it's like when Thanos finally gets the Infinity Gauntlet. Well, this had way more build up than that. This is 8 seasons of television to get to this moment where Naraku finally gets the sacred jewel, the sacred Shikon jewel, but it's in his grasp now. There's 6 episodes left. The team's on their way to confront him, and like I said, we're truly in the final act now. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. This season has been surprising in a few ways, but let's see what they got. Let's see what they got for an ending. Been waiting for this for 14 years, so I'm excited to see how it goes, and I will be back. Let's go finish Inuyasha The Final Act. Okay, so this is where heavy duty spoilers comes in. I just wanted to give quick thoughts on each and every single episode of the final act because I did think it was such a great season. Now, I'm not going to read all these in full, it would take far too long, but I just want to give quick thoughts on each episode. If you want to read, this is just from Wikipedia, so if you want to read the episode descriptions, you can. If you need a reminder of what happens in each episode. But the first episode is Naraku's Heart. I talked about this before, but the first episode does a fantastic job of catching you up and then jumping right into the main story. And the most shocking thing for me in the first episode was Hakudoshi getting killed by Moroku in the very first episode of the season, which was just it was an insanely big surprise. But it was a big win for Moroku, like a big victory for Moroku right off the bat. But the best thing about this episode is that it catches you up and then jumps right in, and it's already starting with all those positives that we talked about. When I watched this first episode, it did not feel like it's been 14 years since I watched the show. It felt like just yesterday that I had finished watching the show. That's a huge plus for that episode, and definitely a big thumbs up. The next episode is Kagra's Wind, which is the episode where Kagra dies, and I talked about Kagra's death already, and how that ties into the rest of the show and all that. Kagra's death was painful. I do wish Sesshomaru was able to revive her with Tenseiga, but he doesn't. But Kagra's death was a gut punch, and overall it was a really good episode. This is also the episode where Koga starts to um, obtain his weapon, his big like weapon upgrade for the season from the Wolf Demon tribe. But Kagra's death was a gut punch, and the first 2 episodes were a very very good start to the season. Third episode, Meidozan Getsuha. This is where Sesshomaru's Tenseiga learns the technique Meidozan Getsuha, and it's where that technique is first introduced into the show in this season, and this technique is essential to the show. It would eventually end up going from Sesshomaru to Inuyasha, but this technique Meidozan Getsuha was not only important to Sesshomaru's character development and Inuyasha's character development, but it was absolutely essential to the overall plot of the final act. So this episode is highly important, and it was a really good episode as well. And is this the episode of, yeah, this is also the episode where Shippo is doing his like Fox Demon School exams, which was just like a side plot that was kind of meaningless, but it did provide some entertainment. So it was a pretty good episode. The Dragon Scaled Tetsaiga. So this is where Tetsaiga gets one of its. Tetsaiga gets a few boosts this season, but this is the first boost that it gets. And it starts bringing in the theme of Tetsaiga being able to absorb demonic energy and absorb, demonic powers, which is essential to what's going to happen later on in the season. It's a pretty good episode, and you get to see Tetsaiga become Dragon Scale Tetsaiga. Um, The next episode is the Great Holy Demon Spirits test. Inuyasha is sent by Totosai to take a test to help master Dragon Scale Tetsaiga and also master Tetsaiga ability of absorbing demonic powers, essentially. And I believe it's this episode that we first see Inuyasha transform into a full demon this season, and he transforms into a full demon while wielding Tetsaiga, which is something that the show had never done up to this point. So that was really, really cool. And they hint at the end of the episode that Inuyasha still has more to learn with the Tetsaiga, which ultimately would be Meido-san Getsuha, which was already introduced in this season. So overall, the first 5 episodes were really, really cool. The coolest thing about the 5th episode was seeing Inuyasha as a full demon wield the Tetsaiga, which is something the show hadn't done up to this point. But, you know, everything. I skipped ahead a bit. I skipped ahead there quickly, but I just wanted to finish the point that everything has breadcrumbs leading up to the big payoff, and that's all evident in the first 5 episodes. So episode 6 was the end of Moriomaru, and Moriomaru and the infant are essentially absorbed back into Naraku, and Moroku uses the wind tunnel and ends up sucking in a bunch of poison. Um, and Moroku, it looks like he's going to end up dying from this poison. And this poison and this miasma ends up being like a permanent injury for Moroku through the rest of the season, and it becomes important to Moroku's plot through the rest of the show. This also puts an end to Naraku's entities of Moriomaru and the infant that are absorbed back into Naraku. So Naraku gets a big power boost from this, and you have the Moroku poison that carries through the rest of the season. The next episode, Kikyo heals Moroku, but Kikyo herself is also in danger, and she requires Kagome's help, and Kagome has to go pass a test and go get her big character upgrade of the season, which is it's a longbow. It's for sacred arrows that is ultimately Kagome's big weapon and power upgrade for the show. But she has to go through a test of visions and proving that she's worthy of this longbow, and eventually she passes the test. And it deals with just visions of her insecurities and jealousies of Kikyo and Inuyasha. And it's a pretty good episode, and it's important because it gives Kagome her weapon upgrade, which is a common theme throughout the first several episodes of the show. And also, if you're a fan of the Inuyasha Kagome Kikyo lore, that's all really explored here in this episode. Next episode is Among the Twinkling Stars, which is, of course, the episode that Kikyo dies. It was a gut punch, fantastic episode, but one of the hardest moments to watch in the entire season. Kikyo's death was definitely very, very hard. The next episode was Sesshomaru in the Underworld. We talked about how Rin has like a fake out death that comes in this episode, but this is more like lore for Meiho-san Getsuha and Sesshomaru's attachment to Tenseiga, but we also get to meet Sesshomaru's mother in this episode. She had not been in the series before this. We've seen Inuyasha's mother before, but of course they have different mothers because Inuyasha's mother is a human while Sesshomaru's is a demon. And Sesshomaru's mother looks pretty much exactly like him. So it's like when he's in his humanoid form, he looks like his mother. When he's in his dog form, he looks like his father. So that's really interesting about Sesshomaru, and it just adds to like his lore. But this episode is more Meiho-san Getsuha lore and exploring that power and that technique. and exploring the demonic underworld and where Meo-san Getsuha leads to, and how if you get sucked into there, you're never getting out. Well, Sesshomaru does get out, and he saves Rin from her fate. Um, Rin ends up passing away inside the underworld, but is saved. Sesshomaru's mother does save Rin by the end of the episode. The next episode, Flowers Drenched in Sadness. This is one of those episodes where I talked about it's like a filler episode, but even the filler leads into the main story. And it's like, this is like a filler episode, but it leads into the main story because, like, in the last act of the episode, it jumps right into the storyline with Kana, and Inuyasha's battle with Kana starts in this episode. And Kana's mirror is playing into even the filler parts of this episode. So this episode's an example of how even the filler leads into the main story now. The next episode, Kana's Gravestone, of course, is the episode where Kana dies. Throughout these last two episodes, Kana has been talking about Kagura, and it's clear that she misses Kagura. Inuyasha and Kana's battle comes to an end this episode, and Kana essentially allows herself to be killed. Naraku kills her. One of the shards pierces Kagome's eyes. Right, so what ends up happening in this episode is Kagome's eye is pierced from the mirror that's broken of Kana's, but Kana gives Kagome a vision of how to destroy Naraku and how the light inside the sacred jewel is ultimately what's going to destroy Naraku. So Kana sacrifices herself. She allows herself to be killed because she no longer wants to be alive without Kagura. But in her death, Kana gives Kagome a vision of how to defeat Naraku, presumably because Kana is pissed off about Naraku killing her sister. And this, again, we talked about how, like, Kana is supposed to be a soulless being, but we really learn in these last two episodes that she does have a soul, and that's mostly evident when she sacrifices herself so she can be free like her sister. But before she goes, she gives Kagome and the heroes the vision in how to ultimately defeat Naraku. So in this list of episodes, we got episodes 12 through 17, Sango's Feelings, Moroku's Resolve, A Complete Mado, In Pursuit of Naraku, True Air, Atomiko's Barrier, and Magotsuchi's Evil Will. You see Sango get her weapon upgrade. Her Ayakotes gets upgraded in episode 12. And we learn that Moroku, he is able to get rid of the pain of the miasma, but the miasma is permanent and eventually will kill him unless they kill Naraku first. Um, I thought that was a good episode. A Complete Mado is Sesshomaru learning how to master Meiho Sangetsusa against the demon that actually created the technique. Sesshomaru battles against this demon alongside Inuyasha. It's cool seeing them fight together, and he only is able to do a complete Mado when Inuyasha when he does it alongside Inuyasha's Tetsaiga, which is a hint that Meo Sangetsusa is going to leave Tenseiga for Tetsaiga. But it's really cool seeing Inuyasha and Sesshomaru fight together, and again, it's adding to the lore of a technique that is ultimately essential to this season. The pursuit of Naraku, we see a big battle against Naraku, and this is, hinting that this conflict is coming to an end. And the way this episode is structured, you think it's possible that this could be the start of the final battle, or this could be the moment where they do finally beat Naraku. Of course, Naraku gets away and they don't quite beat him this time, but Kohaku does give them hope that they can use the pure jewel, that his jewel shard is still pure, even though Naraku has the sacred jewel is completely filled except for Kohaku's. He has the only jewel shard left, and Naraku has the sacred jewel completely tainted. But because Kohaku still is pure, they still have a chance, and they can still purify the sacred jewel and still win the final battle against Naraku. Um, True Air shows is essentially Sesshomaru and Inuyasha fighting. Tetsaiga absorbs the ability to use Meo Sangetsusa, and it leaves Tenseiga for Tetsaiga. And ultimately, um, Inuyasha earns Sesshomaru's respect in this episode, and Sesshomaru um, finally abandons his attachment and his desire for owning Tetsaiga, and he essentially this is Inuyasha's final upgrade. He finally gets Meo Sangetsusa, and now Tetsaiga is at its maximum potential, essentially. And Sesshomaru, he gains Sesshomaru's respect and honor, and Sesshomaru finally kind of gives up on Tetsaiga. And it looks like Sesshomaru's gonna abandon Tenseiga, but he ends up not. He ends up keeping it because Rin, who Tenseiga snaps this episode, and it looks like it's gonna be that Sesshomaru's gonna abandon it, but Rin picks it up at the end of the episode, and she says she'll give it to him later, which is a really cute moment to end the episode. I quite liked it a lot. Hitomoko's barrier. Naraku manipulates Hitomoko, a priestess with unusually strong and powerful spiritual powers and abilities that he met 15 years ago. So this is like another one of those episodes that you think is filler, but it's not, because this priestess is super important to Kagome's arc this season, and Kagome learning and realizing her own powers, and it's essential to ultimately the finale of the season, what Kagome learns in this episode, and it's all connected to the main storyline. This is again another one of those episodes that proves the point of even filler is essential to the main story in this season, something that I think the final act does a phenomenal job with. Makutsuchi's evil will. Inuyasha returns to Kaede's village to tell her about Kikyo. Kaede states that Kagome's innate spiritual powers was probably sealed by Makutsuchi, which is the evil entity of the tainted sacred jewel. The evil will, the Shikon jewel, who did so out of fear. Meanwhile, as a countermeasure against Kikyo's spiritual power, Naraku provides some of his flesh to give Makutsuchi a physical form. And Makutsuchi ends up fighting against Sesshomaru, and this is the episode where Sesshomaru gets his left arm back, which is cool. I always thought that Tenseiga would give Sesshomaru his arm back, that would be an ability he would learn from Tenseiga, and it's not necessarily clear that Tenseiga is the one to give him his arm back, but Sesshomaru does get his left arm back finally in this episode. Finally, after like 7 whole seasons of not having his left arm, he finally gets it back, and he gets his new sword, um, Boxega. That's what it's called, Boxega. I was just trying to remember how he pronounced it. So yeah, he gets Boxega, which is his new sword, his new weapon of the show, and it's like Totosai says that um, Boxega is a sword that was always within Sesshomaru. He didn't have to inherit from his father. It was always inside him, which I thought was kind of random and kind of like lore that was just thrown in there out of nowhere. But, this is the moment where Sesshomaru really, he accepts Tenseiga and he moves on from Tetsaiga, and now he gets his own sword. And it's really cool. It's a really cool episode. Um, Able to not right. So that's the important thing about Box as well, is that whatever it cuts down cannot regenerate, which is essential to the final conflict. So these were a bunch of great episodes as well. Honestly, there's no bad episodes in the final act. So these episodes are all great too. The Day of Days is like kind of like another filler episode, but there are things that happen in this episode that are important to the main plot, and even the filler itself is really entertaining. So I quite liked it. Kohaku's Shard, Makutsuchi is going into battle with Sesshomaru is looking for Magutsushi, and Magutsushi is trying to get the shard from Kohaku to make the jewel whole, and Sesshomaru is the only one that can defeat Magutsushi with Tenseiga. They learn this because the Tenseiga is the only thing that can cut through Magutsushi, because Tenseiga can cut through things not of this world, and Magutsushi is not of this world. Because the Sacred Jewel has died many times. This episode is intense. It's essentially a two-part episode with the next episode. Kohaku it looks like it's pretty much hinted throughout these two episodes that Kohaku is going to sacrifice himself to destroy Magutsushi or to destroy Naraku. It doesn't end up happening, but Naraku does end up getting Kohaku's jewel shard in the episode when the jewel is whole, and it looks like Kohaku is going to die, but the light that Kikyo put inside Kohaku to keep his jewel shard pure remained inside him after Naraku got the jewel shard, which allowed Kohaku to live. And this episode is essentially important because Kohaku does live. He looks like he's about to live. It looks like he's about to die, but he does live on, which is a dramatic moment. But the big story part of this episode is Naraku's finally got the sacred jewel. It's like when Thanos finally got the Infinity Gauntlet or got all the Infinity Stones in Infinity War, and the gauntlet was complete. Well, now Naraku's sacred jewel is complete. That was the big episode, which set up the last 6 episodes of the show, which, in my opinion, are the best 6 episodes of the final act. We have Inside Naraku, Naraku, the Trap of Darkness, Naraku, the Trap of Light, Naraku's Uncertain Wish, Thoughts Fall Short, and Toward Tomorrow. Towered Tomorrow. This is what happens when you start reading during video. And you've been talking for 2 hours, because I've been doing this for 2 hours now, and I've been taking very little breaks as I record this, but Toward Tomorrow. But these last 6 episodes is essentially the big final battle, and then, all the closure. It's the big final battle inside Naraku. We're not going to get all into it. I'm sure you've all seen the show anyways. All I will say is that these last 6 episodes are the best 6 episodes of the season. Everything that they did building up to this point in the show, all the breadcrumbs throughout the season, all the character upgrades, all the plot points introduced, it all comes full circle in these 6 episodes. All the lore that was set up through the first 7 seasons, everything is brought together perfectly, and this conclusion is ultimately super satisfying. I think this show offers closure. It obviously ends the conflict. It brings the story to a close. It offers you moments of closure, and I just thought it was fantastic. In fact, what I did and what I'm going to show next is I did videos before I watched the last 6 episodes, just my quick live thoughts before watching these 6 episodes. I recorded a video going into the 6 episodes and how I was feeling, just my journey as an Inuyasha fan in real life, and watching, my journey as an Inuyasha fan in real life, and my journey as an Inuyasha fan of the content itself, and just how I was feeling going into the 6 episodes. But I also did a video after watching the 6 episodes, so you're getting my thoughts before watching the last 6 episodes, which I think are the best 6 episodes of the season, and then my immediate thoughts after watching the episodes and how just what I was feeling during them. So I'm going to show those now. Okay, so I finished Inuyasha. I did take like a 45-minute break of just doing some other things to kind of let myself decompress just a little bit, but I wanted to give my immediate thoughts upon just finishing the series. That last disc, those last 6 episodes of the final act were amazing. Like, every single one of those 6 episodes were effing amazing. Um, Literally, like my jaw was dropping at how good it was. I did not expect it. Like I thought the season up to that point was really good. I thought the final act up to that point was really good, but I was not expecting those last episodes to hit as hard as they did. I was kind of, you know, getting ready to be disappointed a little bit, but really I wasn't. There were a few things that weren't in there that I wish were in there, but I'll get into that more at another part of the video. But like, it was so perfect. It had closure. It had, it made sense. It was fulfilling. All of the characters had their moments. Like all their characters were designed to be there to, you know, accomplish the goal, and they were there with purpose. Like none of them were just there. Like the episodes were engaging, they were riveting, you were in, and like it was just so good, man. Like it was so good. I was literally like I was saying, like my jaw was dropping as I was watching those 6 episodes at how good they were. That might be my favorite ending to a show ever. Like of all the shows I've ever been big fan of, through my life, like all the different Star Trek shows, obviously Dragon Ball Z, the OC, um, all the different TV series that I've like really been into throughout my life. I genuinely think that was the best ending to a TV show I've ever seen in my life. Was it perfect? No. Like I said, there were two things specifically not in there that I really wish were in there, and I genuinely think they could have fit into what they were doing. Like my vision of what Inuyasha probably could have and should have ended like that I've had for like 14 years. They did a better job of, you know, doing it than what I thought would happen and what I thought should happen. However, there were a couple things not in there that I would have written in there that I think they could have written into what they were doing. Again, I'll get into that later. But those two things aside, I'm completely satisfied. And I was blown away at just the quality of the writing, how everything, all the breadcrumbs were being pieced together. Just again, how riveting and exciting and engaging, and all the twists and turns, and how the stakes kept getting built up and built up and built up. Like, I thought it was phenomenal. And they did a really, really good job of giving closure. The big battle kind of, it's several episodes long, but it kind of comes to an end abruptly and then goes um, more into the soul, like literally and figuratively, the soul of the show, which is, you know, characters having to explore themselves and figure out their purpose, and figure out what the right thing is, which is like all common themes in anime, but it's especially big in Inuyasha. And Inuyasha and Kagome and even Naraku all like trying to find their place in the universe and find out what it is they're supposed to do so this thing can come to an end. And they had that big battle, they had all those moments of the characters coming together, but then they got into like the soul of the show. After the battle seemingly kind of ended abruptly, they got really into it to give like a further ending to everything going on, and I just thought it was so good. And then after that, they gave closure to it, and like they gave all the characters closure, like all the characters you care about got closure that were still around. And I'm just blown away. I thought it was amazing. Like I said, that might have been the best ending. Probably is the best ending to a show I've ever been a fan of. And we're going to do this live on video right now. We're going to add Inuyasha The Final Act to my list. So there you can read 2024 library rentals. and we're going to add Inuyasha. And where is Inuyasha being added? Very easy for me. I have to change all the numbers. This is the thing. When you have a high ranking, you have to change all the numbers. So all of them below will have to be changed. And you know what? We can't have two number ones. We can have two number twos. Like, I don't have ties. They will all be changed, but there it is, officially. Inuyasha, the final act, sets 1 and 2 at the top of my rankings, where it belongs. I loved it. That was incredible. Now back to the rest of the video. Okay, so that was my immediate thoughts after watching the last 6 episodes. I forgot that I showed the before I went into all the episode listings. It doesn't matter. We're not going to go back and fix that now. It doesn't really matter. But there was my immediate thoughts after watching the 6 episodes. So hopefully you enjoyed that. We're getting close to the end here. So I wanted to just quickly put in what I disliked about the final act, because these are moments that I talked a little bit earlier about how I always kind of thought Inuyasha would end with all those different character groups coming together for the final battle, and that is kind of essentially what happened, but they cut out characters from being involved in it, including Kikyo, who I think out of all the ones they cut, I think she should have been in it. And this is what I disliked about the final act, because it's not that these moments didn't happen in the final act itself. It's partly that, but it's just the fact that they didn't happen in the series as a whole. Now, these are moments to me that are both dramatic moments and character moments and just overall logical plot moments that should have happened and never did. And now that the show's over, I'm going to kind of never let go that these moments never happened, and they should have happened in the final act, and they should have happened in the final handful of episodes of the final act. So here's the first one. Sesshomaru never uses the Tenseiga on Inuyasha. What do I mean by that? Inuyasha never dies and is revived by Tenseiga, Sesshomaru using the Tenseiga to revive his brother. Why does that never happen? It should have. It should have happened in the final battle. There's the moment inside Naraku where Inuyasha is corrupted by the sacred jewel and he's a full demon and Sesshomaru's battling against him. That would have been a perfect moment for Sesshomaru to kill Inuyasha, and Inuyasha is dead and thus free of the entity, and then Sesshomaru uses Tenseiga to destroy the entity of the sacred jewel, which does end up happening inside Naraku, by the way. Sesshomaru does end up being the one to defeat the sacred jewel entity with Tenseiga. But how that should have happened, they should have combined that with Sesshomaru killing Inuyasha and using Tenseiga on the spirit, and then going over to Inuyasha and using Tenseiga to revive him. But how they ended up having Sesshomaru kill the spirit and making it a teamwork moment between Sesshomaru, Inuyasha, Kagome, I was cool with it. I thought that was pretty good. However, I still feel like Sesshomaru should have used the Tenseiga on Inuyasha at some point. So if it wasn't going to be from Sesshomaru killing Inuyasha and then reviving him, which I think would have made sense in the context of what was happening anyways, I more just needed a moment of Sesshomaru using Tenseiga on Inuyasha, period. I needed a moment where Inuyasha dies and Sesshomaru doesn't want him to die, so he uses Tenseiga on Inuyasha. And it's a moment where like the two characters can finally kind of embrace their brotherly love for one another. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure there's like an offshoot, part of the manga, or there's like a alternative story out there, or one of like the movies, like the animated movies out there that aren't canon, by the way, and I haven't seen them all, where Sesshomaru uses Tenseiga on Inuyasha. It wouldn't surprise me if it exists out there somewhere, but in the main canon series, it never happens. At some point in the final battle with Naraku, Inuyasha should have died, and Sesshomaru should have used Tenseiga to revive him. Because not only should there be a moment where Inuyasha dies for dramatic purposes of like, oh my gosh, Inuyasha's dead, and like seeing everybody react, but then having the moment where Sesshomaru revives him, because then it's not a cheap death fake out. Because you're getting a dramatic moment of Inuyasha dying, but you're also getting the dramatic payoff of Sesshomaru reviving him with Tenseiga. I will never let it go that we don't have that moment in the show. There should have been a dramatic payoff moment of Sesshomaru reviving Inuyasha with Tenseiga, and it never happened, and I'm not cool with it. The next thing is Kikyo was written out of the series too early in the final act. Um, in my opinion, she should have been part of the final battle. You know, Kagura not being there, Kana not being there, Koga not being there. They wanted to cut down on the characters involved clearly. We talked a lot about that already. Kikyo should have been there. And there were opportunities, in my opinion, for Kikyo to come back during the final battle. So they could have still done what they did and have her die when they did. But Kikyo's returned from death so many times. I was expecting it to happen during the final battle. And if they wanted to kill her off like they did, they should have still brought her back for the final battle. Like she didn't have to. I'm not saying they should have went back and taken her death out of the final act and just have her be alive all the way till the final battle. I'm not saying that, but she should have been there. When the entity of the sacred jewel was killed by Sesshomaru, Magutsushi, when it was killed by Sesshomaru, she could have returned then. Like they could have come up with some sort of lore explanation of how that freed Kikyo's soul, and now she's like come back, and she's back for the final battle. Or when Inuyasha and Kagome and Naraku were all inside the sacred jewel in the last two episodes, that also could have been a moment where Kikyo, because we see the priestess who created the sacred jewels inside there fighting the demons. Why isn't Kikyo in there part of that battle as well? Kikyo should have been inside the sacred jewel, a part of the sacred jewel inside it as well, but she wasn't. She never made an appearance inside the sacred jewel or inside Naraku, and in my opinion, she should have. She should have been part of the final battle. And here's the big moment. I always thought that in the final battle, you would have all the characters there and they'd all play their part the way that they do now. But I always thought that the two to do the final blows would be Kikyo and Kagome side by side. It's like everybody else plays their part, everybody else does their thing, but in the end, it's Kikyo and Kagome side by side shooting Naraku and shooting the Sacred Jewel into oblivion. And Kagome does shoot the arrow into the Sacred Jewel to ultimately end that part of the battle before they end up inside the Sacred Jewel, Inuyasha, Naraku, and Kagome. But like, we never got a moment of Kikyo and Kagome together defeating Naraku, which I was convinced was how Naraku was going to be destroyed ever since I was a longtime Inuyasha fan. I was like, it's going to be Kikyo and Kagome side by side, and it didn't happen. And that bugs me because I feel like that was the natural conclusion to Naraku. It would be at Kikyo and Kagome's hands side by side, both symbolically and figuratively, but also then literally becoming one. Because in my opinion, how Kikyo's death should have been, I think we all knew Kikyo was going to die in the end anyways, but how I always figured it would happen would be is that Kikyo dies and then her soul goes into Kagome. And then it's like you can kind of have some sort of dialogue explanation where it's like Kagome says like, I remember it now. She can start saying things like, I always had visions of this. I always remembered this, but now I remember it all. And she can say like, I remember, you know, standing side by side with myself, like, alluding to her and Kikyo's working together. She can start saying things like, I had visions of this as a little girl, but never knew what it meant. And I had visions of a boy on a tree and never knew what it meant. And it's like, when Kikyo and Kagome become one, it's like Kikyo and Kagome are now one person, and Kagome can start saying like, all these visions that she might have had as a little girl that were Kikyo's life, she now remembers them all. And she now remembers, you know, she remembers everything, and she feels for Inuyasha what Kikyo felt, what she already did anyways. And Kagome is Kikyo reincarnated, so why not just have Kikyo's soul directly go into Kagome? Like it technically did because she's reincarnated into Kagome, but they could have done a moment where we see Kikyo's soul go into Kagome and they become one. And it's like Kagome now has all of Kikyo's memories. And now it's no longer that, you know, Kikyo's dead. She's alive in Kagome. It's not that Inuyasha, you know, is with Kagome because Kikyo's not around anymore. It's that he's with both of them because they are literally one. I always thought that Kikyo and Kagome should have became one person together at the end of the show after they stood side by side defeating Naraku. And those to me are the big moments that never happened in this series that should have. Sesshomaru using Tenseiga on Inuyasha didn't happen, and Kagome and Kikyo defeating Naraku together and then becoming one being, and that didn't happen. And I feel like all of those things could have been, included in exactly what they were doing in these final episodes of the final act. Like you can easily fit in a moment where Sesshomaru uses Tenseiga on Inuyasha. You can easily have Kikyo show up for the final battle, come up with some way of her being there. And she could have helped Kagome be the one to defeat Naraku. And she could have been inside the Sacred Jewel with Naraku, Inuyasha, and Kagome. And she could have joined with Kagome and became one being. Like all these things could have happened within the context of what they were doing. None of these moments that I felt like I always needed as a fan. And these are things I felt like I've always needed as a fan, by the way. Like, I wanted these moments to be in the final act before I watched the final act. These aren't things I came up with now after viewing it. These are things that, as a longtime Inuyasha fan, I wanted to see happen in the final act when I did get around to watching it. And they're not in there, and it bugs me. I feel like these moments could have been incorporated into what they were doing. Like they wouldn't have to change anything to incorporate these moments. They just would have had to add, slots to make it happen. And I feel like they could have and they should have, and that they didn't, it bugs me. So these are the things that I dislike about the final act. Sesshomaru never uses Tenseiga on Inuyasha. Kikyo is written out of the series too early. She's not part of the final battles, and Kikyo and Kagome should have defeated Naraku together and then become one being. These things didn't happen, and that's what I dislike about Inuyasha, the final act. That being said, I love the show, man. I love it. I thought the final act was amazing. It's the best season of Inuyasha, and I just love the show so much. There's an image of, I talked about this image of, Sesshomaru, Aun, Jokin, Rin, Kohaku, Inuyasha, Kagome, Shippo, Kilala, Sango, Moroku, um, like it panning across from behind Naraku's shoulder and seeing all these heroes standing side by side during the final battle. That's my TV with the DVD inside it. I paused it on that shot because I loved it so much, and I took a photo of it standing above above my TV. That's me and Melissa. I mentioned Melissa earlier. Melissa passed away this year, and I've had that picture up on my wall above the TV ever since she passed away. And this is my new phone background. My On the home page, this is like when my phone's unlocked. My locked phone background is a picture of Melissa holding my dog Ripley. Both of them are passed away now. It's a selfie Melissa took of her holding my dog Ripley, and like I said, both of them are passed away. That's been my lock screen ever since Mel passed away. But my home screen has been a picture of Shiny Torchic that I took on my DS. Like that's my actual Nintendo DS with the Shiny Torchic that I got from Steven in Saffron City in Soul Silver. I finally, after years and years of shiny hunting Torchic in Soul Silver, I got it this year in 2024. And that has, ever since I got that, I got Shiny Torchic in May. And from May all the way until now, it's been my phone background, Shiny Torchic, because I literally spent years waiting, hunting for that Shiny Torchic. And after years of hunting and finally getting it, of course it's going to be one of my backgrounds on my phone. However, I've been waiting years to watch Inuyasha The Final Act. And that shot is just so good. And, getting a picture of my TV of that shot with the photo of me and Mel above it, for me, it was good enough to make into my new phone background. So I wanted to screenshot those and just show that this is how much I love Inuyasha The Final Act. And this is how, important it is to my life. Being an Inuyasha fan is to my life. Um, Seeing the image of those heroes coming together and above it, me and Mel, like that adds symbolism to the photo as well. And I'm really, really proud of that being my phone background. I love Inuyasha. I loved the final act. I waited 14 years to watch this show and I enjoyed every single episode of it. I enjoyed every single minute of watching it. I love Inuyasha. And I love that moment of all those characters standing side by side, fighting together. The Kamar, I always have a hard time saying this word. The camaraderie of those characters standing side by side. It was such a satisfying moment. And to be able to take the picture with the frame of me and Mel that's been above my TV for months, to be a part of the photo with that image. I'm really proud to have that as my background. Two things that I love, Inuyasha The Final Act, and of course, my best friend who passed away. But I loved the show that much that it replaced a background of a shiny Pokemon that literally took me tens of thousands of soft resets to get, years and years of on again, off again shiny hunting to get. Um, it just goes to show how much I really did like Inuyasha The Final Act. I loved it. Closure. The show offers great closure. Moroku and Sango get married and they have kids. Inuyasha and Kagome get married. And this show, maybe the Japanese version gives a better explanation of this. The English version didn't really give us an answer of whether or not Kagome's staying in the feudal era permanently. I know she's living there with Kaede and she's becoming a priestess, so she's planning to live there more often, but her brother mentioned that she's hard to visit. He didn't say impossible to visit. Um, so do Inuyasha and Kagome go back and forth between worlds still? The English version wasn't exactly clear on that. Maybe the Japanese version's more clear on it, but regardless, Inuyasha and Kagome, they get married, and we know that they're married. Sesshomaru, he leaves Rin with Kaede, and Rin is growing up with Kaede. And Sesshomaru visits them often, leaving gifts for Rin, and he leaves Rin a new kimono dress, and it's a very cute moment. And Kagome yells out at Sesshomaru, "Big brother," and he looks annoyed, and Inuyasha looks annoyed, but Sesshomaru accepts it. He doesn't challenge it. He's literally Kagome's big brother now because Kagome's married to Inuyasha, and him and Inuyasha are getting along. It's such a really cute, nice, heartfelt moment. Kohaku, he's becoming the main demon slayer now. Moroku's still working to support his family. Koga got married to the wolf demon, who I can't remember what season she's in. She wasn't in the final act, but she definitely is in some of the earlier seasons. It's been so long since I watched the earlier seasons, but he's married, so he's not bugging Inuyasha and Kagome anymore. There's closure on everyone. The show, one thing I hate when shows do, Star Trek Voyager is terrible for this. Is they don't have is when shows just abruptly end and they don't have falling action and they don't have concluding action. This show makes sure to give you like 5 to 10 minutes of closure, of just pure closure. But they do it while being story driven because Inuyasha and Kagome are separated because the sacred jewel is gone, so is Kagome able to get back to the feudal era anymore? But eventually the well does open up, and Inuyasha and Kagome are able to reach their hands to one another after waiting for the well to finally open up after years. But after that moment, the show gives you closure on everyone. Sesshomaru is now Big Brother. Moroku and Sango are married and have kids. Inuyasha and Kagome are married. Shippo is becoming a full-fledged fox demon and he's passing his exams. Kohaku is becoming the main demon slayer. Rin is living with Kaede while still being watched over by Sesshomaru. Koga's married. They give you closure on everything. There is closure within the content itself, but I talked a lot at the beginning of this video about my journey as an Inuyasha fan. And I've said this many times throughout this video. It's been in the back of my mind for 14 years. I need to watch the final act. I talked about all those things earlier in the video that I've done since I last watched Inuyasha before watching the final act. I have to say, watching this was not easy for me. It was very emotional for me. I feel as if I'm putting a closure on a part of my life. I feel like I'm closing a chapter of my life and a chapter of my youth. And as silly as this sounds, the older you get, you realize it's not necessarily the big major moments of your life that transition you from childhood and youth and adolescence into adulthood and from being a boy into a man. It's actually the little moments that are the big things. Like, it's not the graduating college necessarily. Those are things that happen and those are important things, but it's the little moments that we really feel like are the biggest, pushing forward as you get older. And it's been on my to-do list for 14 years to watch Inuyasha The Final Act. And like I said, it was not easy watching this. As I watched it, I felt like my youth was coming to an end. I'm 33 years old right now. I'm turning 34 before the end of this calendar year. I started watching this show when I was 13, 14 years old, 12 years old even. 12, 13, 14 years old. I've been an Inuyasha fan for 20 years. Over 20 years. I've been an Inuyasha fan. And now I've finally seen the final act. The one thing that's been in the back of my mind, you haven't seen the final act. Part of me didn't want to watch the final act. Part of me wanted to continue leaving it. Because, as silly as this sounds, people will say it's just an anime, it's just a cartoon, it's just a TV show. It's not that serious. It doesn't feel that way. It feels as if I just put a closure on part of my life. That my youth, my childhood, my teenage adolescence, my journey of everything I've done in my life since this show came into my life, it's like it all feels like it's connected, even things that aren't connected. All those things I talked about that have happened in my life. And all the content consumption I've been doing as I've been grieving the loss of my best friend this year, most of it has been an activity to fill time. This wasn't. This was something I've been needing and wanting to do for so long. And it's not related to her death, but I started this list. I started this rental list as something to do to help my grievance as a coping mechanism. And this specifically, this show, I just can't help but feel like now that I've watched it and now that I've completed it, I'm putting a closure on part of my life. And not having Inuyasha The Final Act as something on my to-do list in the back of my mind anymore after it has been in the back of my mind for 14 years, I'm going to miss having it in the back of my mind. I'm going to miss wondering what exactly happened in the final act. I'm going to miss the final act. And one thing I think I forgot to mention about the final act is that some of the characters, I talked about the voice cast. Some of them were recast for the final act. When I first heard Kagome's voice, I immediately thought, is that a new voice actor for Kagome? Because it did. It sounded like a new voice actor. But then as the show went on, I'm like, no, it's not a new voice actor. It sounds exactly like it, but it's not. It is a new voice actor. Kagome had a different voice actor for the final act. That voice actor did a fantastic job with the character, and while you initially notice the difference, as the show goes on, you no longer notice the difference because she falls into the character and the character starts sounding exactly like she's always sounded. Sesshomaru has a new voice actor this season and for the final act than he did in the first 7 seasons. And yet you notice it at first and you're like, is that a new voice actor for Sesshomaru? And you then after a while you don't think it is anymore because he falls into the character and it starts blending in and you think, oh no, it starts sounding exactly like it always sounded. But no, Kagome, Sesshomaru, Kohaku, and Kaede all have different voice actors, and yet all of them sound nearly identical to the original voice actors, because they all did such a phenomenal job with the characters. And you notice it immediately at first, but then it blends in, kind of like, you know, you're immediately caught up with the show, like I said. But the reason I want to bring that up is it's like the show is at a different part of its life as well, just like I am. The show is also grown up like I am, grown up to the point that, you know, even some of the voice actors had to be changed. And those new voice actors did a fantastic job. They sounded exactly like the old voice cast. And it's only those 4 characters, but they did a fantastic job. But I can't help but feel like I'm grown up now. I can't help but feel that I've just put a close on a part of my life. And I no longer am able to walk around with Inuyasha The Final Act in the back of my mind, and I'm gonna miss that. And I'm gonna miss these characters because this is the last time I see these characters. The show is over. There is no more Inuyasha. They did do a spin-off in the 2020s. I think in 2020 they did like a spin-off sequel series that takes place in the future, but it never really hit on. And it's not with any of the main characters. It's like the next generation of Inuyasha characters, and it never really hit on. And I have no real interest in watching it because it's not the main characters. The main characters are done. This story is done. Inuyasha is over. I will never see these characters again. Will I watch the show again? Yeah. But here's the thing. I live by myself, and I'm in my mid-30s, or I'm turning 34, so yeah, mid-30s. I'm not watching 8 seasons of Inuyasha by myself. I'm going to buy the final act and add it to my collection. But I'm not watching 8 seasons of Inuyasha by myself. The next time I watch this series will be when I have a family, when I have a wife, when I have kids, and I want to watch it with them. And we'll spend, like a year watching a few episodes a week on my DVD collection. That'll be the next time I see these characters. And that will be a completely different experience from, the experience I had starting watching it as a kid myself. And it won't be, the thing about watching it then is it's like, I've already seen it all, right? So I will never see these characters again. And I'm going to miss it. And I was thinking long about this, on what this felt like. Coming back to watch Inuyasha The Final Act after 14 years of not watching the show and just jumping right back into the final act, what did it feel like? And this is the best thing I can describe it as. It was like seeing a long lost old friend again. It was like seeing a long lost old friend again, except we didn't go to any of our old hangout spots. We didn't do any of our old, activities that we would do together. It was like seeing this long lost old friend again, but going somewhere new, doing something we've never done together before. It's like we've spent years apart, but now that we're together again, we're going to go do something new, and we're going to create a new memory. And then after that memory's over, after that activity is over, after that, visitation is over, we're parting ways again. That's how this feels. Watching this show felt like I was seeing a bunch of old friends again with these characters, but instead of them telling me the same story that they used to tell me, the same stories I've already seen, some of them many times, they told me one last new story, and now they've said goodbye. And because there is no more content, this goodbye was goodbye forever, which is something I've been dealing with already this year. And I know it's silly to say, but this goodbye hurts. This was not easy for me to watch, but I'm glad I did, because Inuyasha The Final Act was awesome. I will miss these characters. I will miss this show. I will miss having the final act on my to-do list. But it is time to say goodbye, because I have now seen Inuyasha The Final Act, and it is at the top of my list of DVD rentals from the library for 2024. Is the content of Inuyasha The Final Act the best content of all the different content I have rented this year? Maybe not, but I'll tell you this. It definitely had the biggest impact on me watching it. And it's not even close. Number 2, number 3, number 4 aren't even close to the impact that Inuyasha The Final Act had on me. So now it's over. It's number 1 on my list. I absolutely love the final act. I feel like I'm putting a closure on a part of my life, and I'm feeling like I'm saying goodbye to a bunch of old friends for the last time because I will never truly see them again. The next time I see them, it'll be with my kids. The next time I see them, I will be experiencing experiences and stories that I've experienced already. The next time I see them won't be a new visit and a new memory and reuniting for something new. The next time I see them, it will be for me to pass them on to my next generation. So, in saying that, Inuyasha The Final Act and Inuyasha the series is over for me. Thank you for existing, Inuyasha. Thank you for this last memory together. Thank you for taking me on one last journey. It's difficult, but it's time to say goodbye. I will see you again, but it will be not for me. It'll be for my next generation. And I hope that they love and appreciate you as much as I do. Thank you for everything, Inuyasha. This is goodbye.